What it do, good people, black people, green people, yellow people. Welcome to Common Conversations. This is your boy, Miguel, and we're about to have a hell of a show. So I'm gonna let that be maybe the only cuss word that we roll out today. For those who are new and you're tuning in, and those who are not new, well, you know, welcome to the Get Down. So today's whole program is about race, right? Not like I don't talk about that every time I go live, but this specifically is about how we have conversations in our own communities, with our own friends and our own family, with the hopes that good folks who are watching today take a different direction, right? And we talk about this thing that we're calling the move forward. So here, just some homework, or just, I should say, housekeeping, right? This is Common Conversations. We go live every Wednesday where we talk about anything under the sun. No subject is off the table. And so since 2006, off and on, we have had a podcast that has talked about economics. We've talked about being black in America. We have talked about your daughter's first kiss or your first kiss, right? We just throw it all out there. And so in past year, we've had a pandemic, right? Since my wife is gonna yell at me later, but since the birth of this nation, we've had a pandemic when it comes to systemic racism. I'm not allowed to use the birth of this nation, so that's twice I said it. But no, real talk. We have come out of this. We've had the murder of Breonna Taylor and protest in Louisville, Kentucky. We've had issues in Southern Indiana, and we'll talk about that as well. And just at large, the things that we struggle with and we're challenged with, and this thing that we face on a day-to-day basis, being black, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We hope everybody will tune in, have some fun with it. So I have some ground rules for all our speakers, and that is just respect each other, because when we engage in this conversation, there's no right or wrong, right? We're all experts in our experience. We're all experts in what we have researched. And here's the reality, my opinion only, and maybe some others as well, is that no one's got it right. When we talk about racism in America, when we talk about racism in Indiana, when we talk about racism in Kentucky, no one has gotten it right, because we're talking about it. And the reality of it is there are so many people who are afraid to talk about it, which eliminates our ability to move forward, right? And so we have to face it. We have to name a thing. We may even talk about the fact that we say bias instead of racism. We say bias instead of racist. They're the same thing. Most people can, soften the blow with bias. I'm just kind of out and punch you in the throat. Y'all know how I get down. Welcome to Common Convo, right? So here real quick, I want to thank all our partners, because the reality of it is that this particular show, this particular live stream that we're going to be doing today and tomorrow couldn't happen without them. One being Metro United Way, one Southern Indiana Economic Chamber of Commerce, and a slew of other community partners, and we'll talk about them as time goes on. The other piece is that if you're watching the chat, so if you're watching the stream, whether you're on Common Conversations YouTube, my YouTube, which is Miguel Hampton, or you're watching it through Facebook or a private group, you're a part of the chat. So feel free to communicate with each other, as well as feed us information. I can't promise that during each segment we'll be able to answer all your questions, but please ask. This is the time to get involved and to engage. You may hear something from one of our speakers and they just say, hey, I need to know more, or I want to know more. I want to know their opinion. Throw it up in the chat. And even if we can't answer it live, we'll try to answer it off camera through another segment. So here it is. I went over ground rules. We talked about bias, racism. Here's the fun part. So our first host for today is, of course, my favorite, my wife, right? And we do this all the time. And so I think it's gonna be good that we jump from segment to segment so that you can see how we do it with different people. And so our first segment has two amazing guests. One is Ann Carruthers, and she's gonna be able to tell you about herself. The other is Cornelia Sue Wright, and she's going to be able to tell you about herself as well. And they're going to have such an enlightening conversation. I can't wait for it. And then I've got Angelique Johnson, who's coming up in my segment, so hang out for that. But that being said, I want to go into a quick dialogue. A good friend of mine was going to have the opportunity to come, and it got called to work. And y'all know how it gets down. You can't, we can't stop racism. We can't stop going to work. So these are the two things that we're struggling with in this life, unless you're independently wealthy. Let's get down. So here's the deal. questions you ask yourself, and this is over the next 2 or 3 days, because you're definitely going to be talking about this show when you're done with it. And so Saturday you might roll into it. Definitely because we're celebrating, I believe, 100 years of Juneteenth. No, that's Oklahoma, but this is Juneteenth celebration week as well, right? June 19th, the day that slaves were free after emancipation. That's a whole nother conversation and topic we'll get onto. But here's this. So here's some things that I want folks to think about while we're going through these segments. And their questions. The first question is this. This is every question, whether you're white, black, green, or otherwise, you should be asking and finding answers for. One, when you see a black person, what do you see? And that question comes from when my wife and I, about a year or two ago, had an opportunity to sit down with some yogis over in New Albany, and we were talking about Michelle Alexander's new book, The New Jim Crow. And we ended up talking about the difference between an African American and a black person. And I'm sure this is gonna roll out during our conversations. So the question I ask everybody, number one, when you see a black person, what do you see? Number two, when you see an African American, what do you see? What does equity and equality mean to you? Because they're separate things. For the last year, I've been sitting on a committee right here in Southern Indiana that was addressing the challenges of COVID and the pandemic and how we rebuild our community. And there was a statement that made, and it's how I received it. I don't know how y'all received it, but it said this: COVID created racism. That made me chuckle, made me want to throw up, but the reality of it is somebody said it. And so we created this committee and we started covering and talking about the challenges and the dynamics of racism. And I asked everybody in the committee one question, and they still have yet to answer it. What is equity? How can we build equity if you can't define it, white, black, or otherwise? And so it's important that we start to identify what equity means, racial equity, and what equality means. Fourth question, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? In my sidebar jokes, I laugh at the acronym. It's DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I only chuckle because for years it was diversity and inclusion. That's DI. Now we want to add equity, and it's E, which would be die. But I guess that would be bad, right? Because black people have been dying all year and prior to that. So I guess somebody said it'd be smart if we just switch it to DEI. It sounds better, but it's still ass backwards. Because the reality of it is we're still talking about diversity. The United States has been diverse since white people got here. Here's that, right? So inclusion, that's a cultural thing. It's an action. We have failed that time and time again, but now we want to talk about equity. So maybe we should have put equity first, then diversity. Or maybe we should have went equity, inclusion, and diversity. I'm just a firm believer when you name shit, that's the direction you go in. So we started out with diversity, then we go equity. Somebody should change that around. We call it RIDE, right? Ride with us, because that's really what we want. We want friends, not necessarily allies, because y'all be changing direction, and we'll talk about that too. But so, as we roll this out, this is Common Convo. This is your boy, Miguel. Most of y'all know me as Miguel. Two different people. So, here it is. Sixth question. I'm gonna run it out for you. What does living in a non-racial environment and culture look like? This past year, I had the opportunity to sit down on WHAS for a program that they were doing called Now That I Have Your Attention during the Breonna Taylor protests and as the community was seeking justice. And they asked me one of the most interesting questions, and I hadn't really thought about it to the degree that they were asking. And they said, what does a non-racial community look like? And I was kind of stuck. I was stunned. It's kind of like asking a soldier, what do you do when you're no longer going to war, right? Life, I guess, in that sense would be boring, right? We would have reached some degree of utopia. But it's made me really think about it. And I hope that today's conversations will also make you begin to think about it, right? This is not about just saying, oh, I don't want to be racist, but the reality of it is, how do we undo it? You know, and when I say undo, because I came home that day and I was talking to my daughter. Her name is Maria, and you'll get to hear her speak on Friday with the youth NAACP. And we were having a conversation about systemic racism in the government and a lot of the policies, both public and private, and the challenges that we face. And she said, Dad. I said, what, Shug? Because that's what we call her. She said, you can't fix it. It's not broken. The system is designed to do exactly what it does. You know, if my 16, 17-year-old gets that, I'm challenging us, why don't we get that? And I'm not an anarchist. Well, somebody might say that, but I'm not, right? Because I don't believe you have to destroy the system in order to correct it. But I think we've been trying to fix something that's not broken, and you can't. We have to correct it. We have to redesign it, right? And a part of that starts with a conversation, and then it's an action, right? Because a lot of us get caught up in conversation. So those are the questions that we're gonna start out with. And I'm gonna be here for 2 days. Y'all get to listen to me talk. I got some other things I wanna share with you. But what I'm gonna do right now is we're gonna go to a quick break, and we're gonna start the segment with Teah, Ann, and Miss Cornelia.
Indiana's own Dana Black here, and if you're anything like me, you get tired of waiting on the Indiana media to cover the issues that matter to Hoosier liberals, progressives, and Democrats. Our issues and candidates seem to always get ignored. Now, you don't have to wait to hear from left-leaning blue politicians regarding the issues that matter to us. Turn Left is your information source. Join us each Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live. Turn Left, Indiana politics from the left side of things.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first segment of RIDE, our Race, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity discussion. My name is Teah Williams-Hampton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the area and the other half of Common Conversation. I'm so excited to be here today. I think that we're going to be tackling some really important topics and having some really interesting discussion on what diversity, equity, inclusion, and race mean in our area and how we move forward. We have had an incredibly challenging year and a half, it seems like, coming out of or trying to get out of COVID and social justice movements. And I really think it uncovered a lot of the social ills that we have, but I think it also made it a little bit easier to bring out these discussions. So for this first segment, we will be looking at some stuff, history and community and leadership topics. So we have two great panelists today, or my partners in discussion here. And so I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. I'm gonna keep looking over at them. So I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. And I will say this. So what I love about Common Conversation is that it's an authentic way of showing up. So we show up as we are, how we are, and say what you need to say. And so we'll just start it at that. So I'll let you go and just introduce yourself, and then how you show up in the world.
Wow. My name is Ann Carruthers, and really, I wear a lot of hats, but really, I want to show up every time as a Black woman, as a person that cares about community and people, and an advocate for all justices. So, yeah, I have a profession, Director of Prevent Child Abuse and System of Care. However, in many places that I'm in, I'm just looking at how do we actually look at people as people and define that in my actions. So,
Your turn, Ms. Sue.
Hi. My name is Cornelia Sue Wright, and Miguel gave me the name of Cornelia, but everybody calls me Sue. So, and that is true. But I show up in the community as a mother and hopefully a volunteer to help out wherever I can. So I'm retired. I was a corporate manager training over that department. So that experience has taught me a lot in dealing with people. So I guess that's about it for me.
All right, well, let's get this rolling with our first question. And Miguel laid out 6 questions. I didn't catch them all because he throws out a lot. So let's start with this question here. And what is your perspective on the climate in our community? I think it's very important to talk about our community here in Southern Indiana because I think a lot of the national news gets shown here. And we've been a part of national news as being a part of the Louisville metro area and Kentuckiana. But I think a lot of times in our community here, we can feel really that's not us. We don't have that issue here. We don't have that problem here. So it's hard to see ourselves from that particular lens. So I know that both you and Sue, I feel like calling you Miss Sue. I just think it's terrible for me to say. Are here in the community as leaders. You're involved in different organizations. So you're well informed with respect to what's out here. So here's the question. Let me wrap that up. What is your perspective on the climate in our community with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So, how far do you feel that we've gotten with it? What do you feel that the community believes about it? What has the community shown us about what their perspective is and what the climate is on that? Who wants to go first? Who's the taker?
I'll take it. Well, first of all, I think because of the proximity that we are to Louisville, that we cannot just leave out Louisville, Clarksville, New Albany, and those surrounding communities. We have to take a look at being a part of that because we're back and forth between the communities all the time. So we bring a lot of things to the table, including what Teah talked about, which would include the news articles that are going on. So I think that if you look at Jeffersonville all by itself, you would say that probably we're okay. But I can't say that we're okay because there's too many things that influence us. It influences the community around us, including places right 6 miles away that have hardly no African Americans in the community. So it is very, very difficult to say that we're okay because when you're brought to the table, all of a sudden, they have had, Caucasians have had no interaction with African Americans, and this is right here in our community. Mm-hmm. And so for us to be able to sit down and talk to each other, we have to trust each other, and in order to trust each other, we have to know each other.
All right. You and Pa should probably get back to this this notion of okayness. Like I use that a lot in therapy, and so we'll get to your response really quick. But when you say that that we seem to be okay,
And I say that like, yeah, some people think we're okay.
And okay would mean what?
Okay would mean, well, on the surface, it seems like we all get along and everybody goes to the same school. We don't have segregated schools, et cetera. And there are X number of African Americans or Hispanic people in this organization or on the city council or whatever. But when you start peeling back those layers of the influential people that are really truly making the power decisions in this city, we're not there.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you for that. What's your perspective on the climate?
Wow, okay. Actually, I think that communication and conversation is powerful. So the fact that we're having the conversation, we've made some progress, because how can we measure things if we don't talk about them? So the fact that we're even here today, and 3 African American women, 3 black women, very strong, I think we're making progress. I do understand what you mean, Ms. Sue, about okay, because actually we can kind of remain status quo. We can say, hey, I mean, no one's bothering me, things are well, and then I can literally go and get a sandwich, right? And hopefully not be bothered. So I think we still are, since we're talking about those things, Teah, we are work in progress, quotation mark, but we've come a long way, and the fact that we're talking about it, I think we're at a good place.
Okay. All right, so we've come a long way. We got some, what do we always say? We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And I think that you're right in terms of we're talking about it, and I think it's also about how we're having these discussions. I work in Louisville with a practice in Louisville, and one of the clinicians there talked about communicating with people at the level of their awareness. So we communicate at the level where people are aware, so that we can continue the conversation in a way that that it's going to be received and it's going to be heard, and it opens doors instead of shutting them. So I think that happens a lot. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I do have a question about, I know that, Ann, you are originally from a different area. All right, so you can let people know where that area is. And Ms. Sue, I believe that you are from here, but kind of left here and came back. So I am interested as to how that informs your perspective as well. And I think that's important. I think that's important as the area begins to change, because diversity means a lot of things. It means race, it means, all type of stuff, sexuality, gender. And it also, to me, includes what we call them, transplants, folks who come here, or folks who left and came back with a different mindset, because I remember living here. I grew up here, and how narrow I didn't realize I was. I'm not saying that y'all narrow, but I'm just saying that sometimes we can be very narrow and not be aware when there's not been that exposure to other perspectives and other ways of living. So could you please just real quick talk about where you're from, where you've been, and how that kind of informs your perspective? I'll let you go, Ann, first, unless you want Sue to take that.
Yeah, I'll go. I actually, it's so awesome, but I was born and raised in Georgia. So we equate the South to having certain issues, challenges, right? I came here and first to be affiliated with the church. I thought that I had destiny. My roots are obviously in faith, and so I came here, and really I did not get acclimated to the community because I was a house, I was a wife, right, raising my kids. So I chose to stay home and raising my kids. But when I began to really get joined to my community, through community service, I was a CASA advocate, and I began to recognize that I most definitely was accepted much more than the people that was here. And so there's a saying, you know, we talk about you're not an expert until you have to travel from 100 miles, right? But I do say that sometimes when you're not from here, your ability to see some of the challenges more blatant, I think it gives you some advantage, because if you're so stuck in the day-to-day grind, sometimes you don't necessarily see what other people observe, and that was my experience. So having now gotten extremely connected, we know we do have a plan and a process to get some things done, because we've identified some challenges.
Okay, nice. Nice. So you have an outside, your perspective. We were able to see things that maybe those of us who have like been here forever may not be able to see. It's like being in the forest. What is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't see the forest for
the trees. And so when you don't have that, you can kind of see it from a totally different lens. What about you, Miss Sue?
Well, I was born and raised here, moved to California. Lived in California up until 1998, actually. And I guess, and because I've traveled so much, I love to travel, and I've been to over 40 countries, I can't see a lot of differences between how people are looked at, whether it be by gender, culture, race, whatever. You're still going to have, I still see those pockets in those different countries, even, of one race thinking they're better than the other, or one group of people thinking they're better than the other. So moving back here, and the only reason that I really and truly moved back here was because it was where my family was. This is where I was raised. And the cost of living was a whole lot cheaper than California, let me tell you that. It was a whole heck of a lot cheaper. And because I like to travel so much, then that gave me extra money to do so. Not only have I traveled on my own to all these different countries, but I traveled a lot with AT&T as a training manager. So I've not only lived in San Diego, California, I've lived in San Francisco, I've lived in Indianapolis, Miami, and so all the different areas that I traveled to, but you still kind of look at it from, I tend to look at things from a perspective of standing back and just watching people, and you still have that feeling of, do I really belong? Are they still judging me because I'm a woman in Dubai? Are they where you may not get judged by the color of your skin, but you're still being judged by the fact that you're
Your gender.
So those are the kinds of adjustments that you have to make. And coming back here, I was so involved in some personal things with my mom, and I really didn't get into the community probably until I was here for another 5-10 years, because I just didn't have the time.
Okay. All right. I was going to take this a whole other direction, but I do want to. I do maybe want to just explore a little bit about how gender, because we're here to talk about race, but it's hard to talk about just that when you're a Black woman, when you're a Black woman, and how that informs your walk and engagement here. And it may not, so it's almost a loaded question. It's almost a loaded question, but being Black women in the community, and being involved as you are, or as some people say, as we are, because I try to say I'm not in all this. When it's not, but it's not true. How does that inform your engagement and your walk, and how you adjust? Don't adjust, because sometimes we're in a room full of other women, sometimes we're in a room full of men. So how does that inform you as well? I mean, we can give her a break, and we can go to you, Miss Ann.
Well, I think I define race as a social construct. It's an ideology that we have, or definition that we have about people, right? And when you think about things that are construct, you can't necessarily kind of measure those things. They're just kind of invisible, but yet they influence us so much. So in terms of whether it is people identifying me as a certain type of black woman, or just a black woman, or just the fact that I'm female, right? Because that language is different in different spaces. I think we have to go back and define what or understand what their definition of and how they're defining us. And when I say that, us, as in Miss Sue and her well-traveled experiences, and me simply walking into the room, how are we being defined? And that's kind of where we start with really beginning to, let's say, deconstruct, if I may. So, yeah.
I like that. You kind of moved me to the point I moved away from. Yeah, well, because we were talking about the construct of race, which it's not something that I think we do a whole lot of discussion on. And who did a really good book on this one? Not most recently, but it was Ibram X. Kendi, and a lot of people know him for the anti-racist book. But if you didn't read Stamped from the beginning, you kind of don't know where the term anti-racist, came from, at least not from his perspective. And he talked about, how race was developed as a construct, which means, so layman's terms, like somebody built this, so yes. Race is a built-in concept. So somebody made it up based upon what we understand in the country is about power control economics. You can read the book. I'm sure we'll be talking some more about historical perspectives there. But in terms of, and I like how this is said, because race being a social construct also means that race has meaning. Races have meaning. So if we start off with, there's white people, and there's black people, and there's brown people, and then there's, Asian people, and then, indigenous folk, all of that means that each of those groups are assigned, and this can be a discussion, are assigned certain roles, certain places, certain meanings, and all of that. And so, historically we've been informed, and currently it kind of informs. It informs our engagement with each other. And Miguel asked a question in the beginning, but we will actually pick up on that discussion, because he's telling me to wrap up. We're going to pick up on that discussion when we come back. So we're going to break for a commercial, and then we'll pick up there.
On June 17th and 18th, we are inviting you to face a common conversation about race, inclusion, diversity, equity, and the impact systemic racism has had on white and BIPOC communities. Our esteemed group of panelists include Indiana's own Dana Black, Charlestown Mayor Treva Hodges, State Representative Cherish Pryor, and Louisville's own Tim Finley Jr., and a host of other influential community leaders. Join us as we embark upon brave and necessary conversations about the move forward.
Start it up.
All right, we're back for another segment, our first segment. So we stopped at a discussion. I initiated a discussion on the construct of race. Essentially that race is a made-up concept, and it goes back, way before the U.S. However, it's been very effectively used here in the U.S. So to break it down a little bit more, so we were broken down into just to say, black folk, brown folk, indigenous folk, Asian people. And when we break down people like that, so at this point, we're kind of talking about white supremacy. But people are assigned value and meaning. People are assigned value and meaning. And I think that's something that I think it's important to talk about, especially in the discussion about race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because how we engage each other sometimes, as much as we may not want it to be this way, is informed by some of those meanings and some of those values. Miguel used the term bias or implicit bias. So sometimes those values or those meanings are kind of tucked back here, or maybe they're not. So if we use a general term like black people do this or white people do that, a lot of that is based upon the meaning and the value that folks are assigned. Now, this is my opinion. This is my opinion. All right. So with that being said, how do you think that race, as a social construct, with its values and with its meaning attached to whoever it is, white people, black people, or BIPOC is the term that we're using now, black, indigenous, and people of color. How do you think that affects our engagement in the process of diversity, equity, and inclusion? I know that's a big question.
Well, that's a big question.
Mm-hmm.
It really
it's a
is.
big one. I know.
So how do I answer that? The first thing I want to say is, and you're exactly right, all those different little races that we have categorized here in the United States. Throughout my travels, most countries their citizens identify themselves as the country, period. It doesn't matter what race they are. And we here in the United States, we're still fighting that. Over 400 years of still fighting that. And I have to say that part of that which came out was affirmative action. You and I know that white people, if we talk about affirmative action, they get, but simply put, affirmative action was simply put in place to give minorities, and as long as it's put in place correctly, that there's an active role to get those minority members better education and better jobs. Mm-hmm. And that helped us along the way, believe it or not. I can tell you. Affirmative action helped a lot of us along the way, giving out more of that job opportunities and educational opportunities. Now, people have forgotten about affirmative action, but in a lot of ways, but you still, every single application that you have to do, they want to know here in the United States, what's your race? But at the same time, people have brushed affirmative action under the rug. And we always say, well, it shouldn't be based upon race, my skills, my ability, my talents, my knowledge. It should be about, you know, everything that I bring to the table, just like you do. And we tend to somehow get that all twisted. We still don't have it right. We still don't have it right. And to me, to be identified, I was born in America, and I should be able to say to anybody that walks up to me, I'm an American, period, point blank, in the conversation.
All right. You got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I like that as well, because I feel like in this context as well, when we talk about it being a social construct, we have to, in order for us to make progress, find a way to measure or define the behavior and equate that to the racism, right? And so when I do a lot of data, we know data drives funding, data drives outcomes. And so when we talk about how do we conceptualize or quantify the data to identify the behavior that defines us, putting the language of racism to it. Do you get what I'm saying? I'm trying to like be real methodical, because racism is a combination of things, right? But it all is about the behavior. How are you treating people? And so once we say, okay, this behavior is what we've defined as you're mistreating them, because I think we want to include, you know, equity and equality and associate that with behavior, right? So, I mean, man, there's so much information going on in my mind.
Yeah, but
it's like, oh my goodness, because these are not things that we're talking about. These are things that we've actually thought about and we've experienced. You know, because all of us have had one experience or another with someone mistreating us because of our race, and then we thought, okay, that was racism. But what behavior defined that? What behavior did we identify that with? Are you understanding me?
Yeah, I do.
You're the clinical side of this.
I do. You know, I don't even. You know, I'm trying not to even go clinical with it, but I cannot help it sometimes. But you're right in the sense that it's one of the most difficult things to, I guess, quantify, but maybe not. You know, so you know what is racist behavior? You know, what does that look like? And it's been one of the most difficult things to prove. Like, people don't even want to go to court on that, because how do I prove that somebody's behavior is racist unless they come out and say, you know, I hate people of color, or I hate, you know, whoever of color, and that I'm doing harm to this person because of that. But I need to kind of back up a little bit to what Ms. Sue said as we were talking about affirmative action. And there is a book. I have not read the entire book. I am one of those people. I will order these books. and I will read part of the book. But I read enough of it. And there's a book it's titled When Affirmative Action Was White, by Ira Katz-Nelson. And as I think that's the thing, is that since it's not said to be affirmative action, it isn't seen as affirmative action. So race for white people in the country had been used as a leg up for the GI Bill, for housing loans, all of that. So even though at that time it was explicitly stated to exclude people of color. So for a very long time, affirmative action or affirmative activity was very white-centered. And then when it shifted, because there weren't enough people of color being seen in certain areas, because my daddy used to say, you know, you can't change people's hearts, you know, but perhaps policy perhaps policy can make it a priority to look this way. So unless folks were made to, whether it's systems, organizations, government, were made to look at, hey, it is 98% white here or 100% white here, we are moving towards it. So we are not trusting. I have to say this, to remove affirmative action means or meant that we are trusting that people will consider other folk besides people who look like themselves. So I have to trust. Once all that is taken out of the picture, I have to trust that you're going to be all right with choosing somebody who doesn't look like you. And I don't know that we've gotten there yet. So what? And I like how you said it kind of gets muddled, because what gets interesting about affirmative action is that I think we forget. We either forget or we didn't learn that, you know, when race was convenient to use for white America, it continued to be used. But when race began to be perceived as inconvenient, I know, then all of a sudden talking about race, considering race, is wrong. And I need to say that, and whoever is listening, whoever is just chew on it. Chew on it. We're giving you ideas and thoughts and concepts to chew on it. If you don't agree, that's fine. Let's have a discussion about that. But the man wrote a book about it. It's documented. It was in federal law. And if you're not able to follow the history about it, then you're not going to quite understand how we got here and why we're even discussing this, because it won't have a foundation or a perspective. So I did definitely want to add this. So let me just kind of tamp down a little bit. And I'm not a historian, but I do think it's important that we know, you know, the future has a past. J. California Cooper, she's one of my favorite authors. And one of her books, so I don't think it had anything to do with what we're talking about. I don't know, because it was one of the books I ordered and didn't read. But one of the titles of her book is The Future. So we're talking about moving forward. The future has a past, and we have to understand it and contextualize it in that way in order to figure out how to move forward. So let me look down here and see what my next question is with respect to equity. How much time do we have? We got 5 minutes, and upside down 5. All right, we got it. So we have 5 minutes. Just really quickly, Miguel wants me to get in this last question. So I'm going to see if I can find it. All right. So the last question is, what do you think that we can do to eradicate racism, and be as honest as you can with it? And that's on a community level, a personal level. What do you think that we can do to eradicate it, or what's the best we can hope for? I'll let him define what equity is later.
Well, I think the best we can hope for is that the majority of the people in your community talk to each other, respect each other, trust each other, and are able to sit down and have true conversations with each other. One of my Caucasian colleagues, I've been part of discussions for over a year now, and she asked me, how do I become an ally, you know, and how do I do this? How do I do that? And by the time the year was up, I was just tired. I was just kind of like, why am I educating you? I mean, it's time for you to get some stuff going on here on your own and start reading some books or doing something here. And no matter what happens, I still think that because she's from the community that was white, the whole community was white, period, she still doesn't get it. And we just really have these strong conversations about it, but she can't go back to her friends and start a conversation about it. She says, whenever I start a conversation about racism and equality, all my friends shut down. They don't want to talk about it. Yeah. So how do you have to have some, you know, the whole thing has to be such that this is all brought so that other people engage that normally would not engage in
Yes.
that conversation, because you're not really going to change an adult's opinion about that unless you get them engaged.
Okay. All right. Ann, you got anything?
You know, I go back to the behavior. It's how we treat people. And so why I wanted to emphasize the fact that when we measure behavior in the field of psychology, it's about how people behave, right? We study those things. We begin to connect that with why are we treating people that way? So that's the connection with you're acting this way, you're treating people this way, and then you ask the why. Is it because of their race? Is it what is it, and why are we treating people the way that we treat them? The other thing in terms of community, I think that in order to really build community, we talk about equity and equality, but I think there's another E that we miss, and that is called empathy. The ability to put yourself in their shoes, the ability to have an emotional connection with their experience. That other E is so important, because we can never get these paths of, equality or equity if we don't empathize with their experience. People have gone through some things as a result of being black or being Hispanic or being Asian.
And I'm going to say something a little controversial on this one, and even being poor and white.
Yes,
I think I need to say that.
There's so much, but we've created these societal statuses, categories, if we will. And so if we incorporate empathy in our engagement, we can improve community. We want to improve community as a leader, incorporate empathy, show that you care. My job as a director of Prevent Child Abuse and System of Care is I took this so into every part of my life. I want people to know every time I engage with you, no matter where you are, what level you are, where you came from, we want you to get into what we call the club, this positive club of creating this positive system, and that we care. We care about people. We care about you. I'm getting emotional, guys, because passion is power. Knowledge defines where we want to go. Education strengthens us.
All right, that's a good space for us to stop. Thank you so much. As we talk about the move forward, it's opening the door to speak to each other, opening the door for empathy. A good resource for that, author Daryl Wing Sue wrote a book called Race Talk, The Conspiracy of Silence. So check that out as well in case you want to look at a manual at how to move forward. He's got some great ideas and some great concepts in there, part of my library that I halfway read. All right, so we're going to wrap up this segment. Thank you so much, Miss Sue Wright, and to my friend Miss Ann Carruthers.
Hey, thank you.
So we'll be
much.
coming up with another segment soon. I'm not sure what the name of that segment is because Miguel did the whole thing. So we will be back in just a moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Indiana's own Dana Black here, and if you're anything like me, you get tired of waiting on the Indiana media to cover the issues that matter to Hoosier liberals, progressives, and Democrats. Our issues and candidates seem to always get ignored. Now, you don't have to wait to hear from left-leaning blue politicians regarding the issues that matter to us. Turn Left is your information source. Join us each Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live. Turn Left, Indiana politics from the left side of things.
Man, y'all know how we get down. This is Gel, Common Conversation. I know y'all enjoyed that conversation, right? Here's the thing. You know, I don't have my iPad, so I didn't remember my notes. Let me just scoot over here real quick. That's why we love doing it live, because anything can happen. And this is Common Conversations, and this is what we do when we go live every Wednesday. I've got a cool favorite person with me, but I just want to run through some things because Teah and Ann and Miss Sue hit a lot. They covered a lot. And I hope that you, those who are watching, those who may be listening to this later, take something away from it. Maybe even yourself be brave and start this conversation in your own spaces, right? Because this is a brave conversation. You know, there are costs to all of us, both white and the BIPOC communities, when it comes to racism. We're all paying costs, whether it's through justice system, whether it's economics, whether it is just in the sense of relationships. You can say it doesn't exist if you don't want to, but the fact of the matter, as Teah said it, there are facts, there are books about it. All you have to do sometimes is just open your eyes and read. And if you can't read, we got YouTube. I'm just saying. So, as Angelique and I get ready to sit down and chop it up, I wanna kind of cover something. And if I didn't say this, I'm gonna say it a lot. So if I already said it, cool. And if I didn't know it, there it is. So James Baldwin said, "Not everything that you face can be changed." I said that backwards. Not everything that can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. I keep screwing it up, and I've been saying it all day. So let me say that again for you real quick. Not everything can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And the reality of it is when we're talking about racism, when we're talking about economics, when we're talking about the plight of being black in America, in Southern Indiana, in Kentuckiana, in Louisville, Kentucky, all the listings, right? We have to start looking at this. We have to start conversing about it. And more than that, we have to look at how we strategically move forward and build our own spaces, right? So a couple of questions to think about, and I'm gonna keep throwing questions out there. And these are questions that, again, both black and white people, all community, all people of color, need to ask. And this kind of wraps up where Teah and them led. And I'm gonna say this, it's gonna be a little harsh. And white people don't repeat what I'm gonna say, just you'll know how to paraphrase it. But here's the reality. This country was built on the backs of slaves, Africans. We now call African American, we now call black people. The question we have to ask ourselves when you are afraid or you wanna say that this thing doesn't exist, ask yourself, why did white people have to create slavery to start with? And why did they need a nigger to do it? I want you to really ask yourself that, because we will say that mentality was in 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1960s, 1980s, maybe early 2000s, 2016. But the fact of the matter is, much of the community, much of the states, much of our country still have the same mentality. We change laws, we change names, but the culture and the dynamics, right, are still the same. Teah said, what? The future has a past. And if we're not willing to look at it, study it, and understand what we do different, then we stay in the same place. So I want to welcome you to Common Conversations. This is your boy, Gel, and this is how we talk every day. So I got my homegirl, Angelique, sitting here with me, who is just brilliant. She told me I had to be on my best behavior, so before we throw her on camera, I'm just gonna put a new mask on real quick. Matter of fact, I'm gonna take my hat off so I could be Miguel. And we are going to talk and have an unscripted conversation about whatever. This is off the books, right? So she said, I'm gonna, you see this big old smile right here, right? Because she's like, if this dude don't make me choke him.
You said you're gonna be on your best, and we already started off with why they need a nigger to do it.
That is my best behavior. You should really see what I wrote. I'm paraphrasing. I just look right here. See the white stuff I'm not reading. It's the red stuff I'm keeping. So I gotta respect, our partners who have dare to venture into this, right? And so when we talk about cost, there's a cost to hosting an event like this. When we're talking live streaming, we're talking equipment, time, people. And one of the things I said in the newspaper about 2 weeks ago was, you know, as much money as we spend on studying a pandemic, studying, you know, diabetes, studying cancer, you know, we should be spending on how to build Black economics and how we improve our Black communities and how we build ecosystems, right, where we can all thrive. And you know, for those watching, you guys can talk about it in your own home, but the conversation I want to have with you is how do we, you know, kind of how we do it here. And so I'm gonna start out with a really hard question just for you.
Okay.
And then we can dive into the lighter stuff. I don't think, you know, if there's a lighter stuff.
I'm already scared.
Don't be scared. All right, so, well, you know what, let's start here. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay, cool. So I am Dr. Angelique Johnson. You can refer to me as Angie or Angelique. But I got into this whole Black wealth thing accidentally.
Okay.
I grew up extremely poor at some moments, and also at other moments it was like things were good. So it was the best of times and the worst of times at all times. So because I grew up like that, my dad was an entrepreneur, you know, my parents did a lot of businesses together. I just saw the struggle, and it just wasn't for me. But I went to get my Ph.D. University of Michigan in electrical engineering. Again, nothing has anything to do with business. Got to the last year of my dissertation, which is this long-winded journey to get, you know, some letters behind your name.
There it is.
And I decided I wanted to venture into the entrepreneurial world, but as an African-American female doing a medical tech startup. You know, what we do is implants, kind of like pacemakers.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of one of one in that area. And
there are not a lot of Black women in the tech space, period. At least that you get to see.
There's not a lot that you get to see. And then we talk about med tech on top of it.
Yeah.
Then you're talking about stuff dealing with the brain and the nervous system. And
So
then
here's the hard question.
Yeah.
Right. So as a Black woman in that space, when was the first time you experienced racism in that space?
Oh, yeah. You told me you were asking me this question.
That's what makes it a hard question.
It's a hard question. It's always, okay, so I'll tell you, the first time I experienced racism, it didn't exhibit itself in a loss for me.
Okay.
Because sometimes, you know, most times racism is always, you know, you're losing something in the process. Okay, then in the entrepreneurial world, and I was explaining this to a group of people too, people, they bet money on the entrepreneur, but they like things that are, in their mind, an oddity.
Okay.
So because of their racism, they see me, an African-American woman, I'm standing in front of them, I'm talking business, you know, I'm communicating to investor, here I'm doing this med tech startup. And I remember I had a business coach at the time, and he would, you know, attend these, you know, pitch things that I would do, and he was like, they're just mesmerized by you. And I don't think he understood why, but I understood why. Because they didn't expect me to stand in front of them and be educated, to be confident, to know what I was talking about, to be able to, like, you know, go blow for blow on their questions and them tearing apart my business model and stuff like that. And so that was the first time I experienced racism.
Wow.
Now you could say it was a positive because they were loving me out of their bias. But if you think about it, it's not really. It's kind of the same thing as like they love to see us entertaining them,
yes,
doing sports. So I was putting on it sort of an entertainment.
Okay.
You know, and maybe they knew it, maybe they didn't know, and they couldn't verbalize that to themselves. But that was what was mesmerizing. And I mean, but it worked out for me because I would win all the time because they would just be like, oh, this is something different. This is unique. Of all the things, of all the pitches we've heard today. Yeah. This is unique. This is something that's, for whatever reason, is stimulating us, but still was racism behind it. But
so when you think about it like that, right? Because you're one of few. Yeah. How do you see that situation, that opportunity working for another Black woman or another Black man?
I see it. Yes and no.
Yeah.
I've seen it working, but I've also seen that there's a very specific caricature of what stimulates them. And then that's where the danger is, because you could say like, oh, what's wrong with people? And I've heard this from, I hate to say, I've heard this from white people. What's wrong? You know, Black people are great in sports. You know, Black people are entertaining. Why do you all think that that's a negative stereotype? And I'm like, because you've decided actually what that caricature of a great athlete looks like. So if you're Colin Kaepernick and you're down on your knees, suddenly you're no longer entertaining to me. So they decided whatever the secret sauce I had was entertaining to them. But that doesn't mean that every black woman that stands in front of them is gonna have whatever that thing. And if I say something that's contrary, then suddenly I'm outside of that entertainment. Now I'm making you uncomfortable. Now it's like, And that was the second kind of wave of racism I experienced as an entrepreneur. So once you get past the entertainment thing and you start really having real conversations, then it's like, well, I don't know if I'm comfortable with you being smarter than me in this area. I don't know if I don't have any context for really signing a check to you because I've never written a check to a black business before. You know, I mean, so it's entertaining at first, but then you start seeing, you know, the negative side of that mentality.
So, you know, it's interesting because, you know, it's something that we all face, and you're facing it in the tech world. You know, I've faced it specifically here, being in Southern Indiana as an entrepreneur, and you know, it's fun because we have a similar lifestyle. I grew up relatively poor, so we like to say, you know, we grew up with very little, but we came from something, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we get here. You know, and somebody asked me a long time ago. They said, you know, why do you keep fighting racism? And I started thinking to myself, like, I've been fighting it since the day I was born, for the most part. Like, I can remember the first time somebody called me a nigger. I could remember the first time that, you know, I went to a school and they wouldn't let me in because I was the only Afro-Latino, and that's a whole nother construct and conversation. But then I remember at some point in time, you know, after high school and fighting white folks to prove a point and to prove that I'm equal and working harder than everybody else, I got into the business world. And, you know, I thrived and you know, traveled all over the US, and we were doing extremely well, and then I moved here. And I remember the first time I moved here, I ended up working for a lady by the name of Agnes Stewart, who ran a promotional products company. And I pitched this project. GLI was a part of it. Yeah, I do name names, so get over it. But GLI was a part of it, and I remember they stole the whole concept and gave it to another company. And I'm not from here, so you know how I am. That's why you told me to be PG. So, and I was younger then. I went bananas. And I remember Agnes, you know, I cussed some people out at GLI. You know, I told them that they was thieves and liars.
Yeah.
Like, I just went straight, you know, bananas. And then Agnes was like, you can't do that here. And I was like, why not? Like, you know, I was like, if somebody steals from you, do you not, you know, if somebody is going to be aggressive to you, then you mirror that. And she's like, well, you know, it doesn't work like that for us here. And that was the first time in a business space that somebody applied a limitation to me, right? Or applied a scenario where it's okay to steal from him as long as we don't steal from us. And I was like, wow. And so I think about that, and I bring that to the point because, you know, I've had multiple conversations even about this event, about making sure that it's not an us versus them conversation. And Nikki and I were talking this morning on the way here, and we had a conversation yesterday too about, you know, when you bring in financial partners or people want to invest in your business, and kind of like you said, you know, once you hit that gap where you're no longer entertaining, you know, there's a problem, there's a struggle. And so some people were like, Miguel, you know, as soon as you start talking and being a champion for black people, well, you might lose some friends. And I was thinking, I might lose some allies too, and that means you weren't in my camp for the begin with. But that can be so much our community. And I've been on this road of saying, how do we build an ecosystem that black entrepreneurs both can learn and thrive in this space without having to consistently entertain?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is we start valuing the ecosystem on stuff that matters.
Okay.
Like at the end of the day, so for example, there's a lot of incubators, accelerators, you know, entrepreneurial training programs specifically targeted to black founders around the country. We have programs even regionally here. And, but sometimes by the nature of who is starting the program, could be black or white, I hate to say it.
Okay.
The thought is, I'm doing good and I want to do good, but they don't. I'm a scientist and I'm like, so what's the metric for good? Is it businesses at the end of the day coming through your camp and getting funding? Is it businesses increasing their revenue? So I think the first step is we start getting, as one of my good friends, she always says, like, they're not serious about it. So if you were serious about it, I would say, what resources are you providing in the community? How do we know if you're serious about it? Does it increase revenue for the businesses, black businesses you're supposedly helping, or does it increase, capital funding for them? That's the first thing. And then the next thing is, I'm a big proponent of, by us, for us.
Yes, absolutely. Let's go.
So, but us also need to work together. And one thing that I'm excited about that I'm going to be working on with Life Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit that I'm working with, Tim FIndley Jr., Pastor Tim FIndley Jr.
He'll be here later today.
Yep, he'll be there. His nonprofit is a Black Wealth Week in September.
Okay.
And really doing, kind of a Louisville, Indiana, Lexington type regional Black Wealth Week, where it's less about one organization, putting on a whole bunch of events, and more about, hey, there are several people in this region doing stuff for Black wealth. Why don't we galvanize together, but also letting each person individually, because it's almost like a living resource map for economic development in the Black community. So let's say the Urban League says, hey, well, we have this new sports complex and we have a Black wealth component to that. Okay, then the Urban League should do something, in this Black wealth that fosters Black wealth, but also puts a spotlight on, hey, maybe you didn't realize about some of the things that they were doing that were non-traditional, right? Not just about income inequality, but about wealth. Okay. Working with you, of course, in your guys' organization. So to me, it's about us coming together in community and building wealth, and less kind of the siloed approach that I feel like we're really good with the silos.
But in part, is that not training? Like we've trained to, the same way I look at, let me wrap this thought. See, this is the greatest thing about having these conversations and they're unscripted. You really have to pull your thoughts out and you can't just ramble like I do. So I can't remember what book it was, but I'm reading a bunch of books and I'm listening to quite a few too. But there, when we talk about affirmative action, right? Specifically affirmative action that built America for white people. And then we springboard that back to the Black community. That part doesn't necessarily exist, right? And I totally lost my train of thought. So when we're talking about building this ecosystem, but we're in these silos. The reality of it is that we've been trained not to work together, right? By the same stereotype that the greater community or white community has said, we're not going to work with you, right? And so we've created, as our communities have created this percentage of acceptance. Let's say it like that. So, speaking about diversity programs, right? They'll say, oh, we got 10% spend that we're going to give the minorities. There's 100% of the pie. You're not eligible for that, but we'll give you 10%, which creates a scarcity, a competition around scarcity, right? And so that puts Black people in a silo.
But they've been doing that since slavery.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's so many, we're always, and I hear people, we're always so hard on the Black community for certain things, like, and even running with stereotypes, like, Black families this, and, and we do work in silos, but it goes back further. It goes back to the fact that we were pitted against each other on plantations. So and people, it's unfair to compare our community to, because it's a favorite one, I'm just going to say it, to the Jewish community, right? Okay, you don't have to compare it to the Jewish community. You can compare it to the Nigerian community. They come here and they are in community. Most people that immigrate over here, they tend to be more in community. They build wealth together. Why? Because they were already doing that in their homeland. But when we came here, we were shipped here. And that community was beat out of us, was trained out of us, all kinds of dynamics and just distortion of the family element even, So the fact that the amount of community we're even able to build, considering the fact that it was beaten, deprogrammed out of us, through hundreds of years of slavery, and then you had Jim Crow, and then you still have it, like you said, now. I mean, now it's just, hey, well, we got $1 billion fund, and, patting ourselves on the back. Oh, we allocated $40 million to, Black founders. But what that says is, if we can get that 40 million to Black founders, we actually don't have to give you a drop of the rest of the billions.
Absolutely.
And
billions,
they
right?
won't
They gave
say it,
40
but
million,
yeah.
but billions, you don't get access to.
You don't get access to it. And unfortunately, we have to be happy about that. We're like, oh yeah, great,
At least we got something.
At least we got something. They got a new fund for, for us. And I look at the fund, I'm like, $100 million, but y'all give away billions of dollars in investment.
Yeah. And we see that. So even at that level, like, there are going to be some people at home say, well, I'm an entrepreneur, but I only do $500,000, $1 million a year. We're not going after those kind of funds. And the reality of it is that's on a high scale. So, just scale it down, right? So if there's let's say they're going to spend $100 million in New Albany, Floyd County, in construction. Ask yourself, how many Black people in the construction field get access to those kind of contracts, right? I guarantee it's less than 10%. Yeah. Right, I know it is in Jeff, right? You know what I mean? So when you look at the numbers, you're saying right here, we're not distributing wealth. We're not even including, the people of color in that relationship. We're okay if they're servers, right? They can be we can still kind of focus on the servant community, right? And that even is a Black-white issue, right? Because we're not gonna go there. But
well, it goes back to another thing that you were talking about in preparation for this, which is the difference between equality and equity. And it's like, okay, everybody has nothing prevents me from going for the applying to this venture fund, which is $2 billion, in size. Yeah, I can apply all day long. But the question is, do I have the same chance of getting it? No, because systemically, it's not equitable. I'm actually applying from a position of lack compared to the other. Some of it, the lack is it's not my intellect. It may not even be access to, like I might have a great company that's further along than a company owned by a white male. But just by the very nature of the fact that the investors are more comfortable and more familiar with investing in white male-led companies, then I can apply all day long. So they say it's that's we have equal access, right?
So in that space, we're still overcoming stereotypes.
Yeah, but it's not equitable. We don't both actually have the same. We're not starting from the same point to get those funds.
Let's take a quick break and then let's define equity. Can we try to do that on
sure.
live, right? I mean, there's no right or wrong to this, and maybe maybe that's the start of our move forward, right? Yeah. So we're in Louisville. We're right now sitting in Jeffersonville and Community Action building in their computer lab, which they serve the financially challenged in our community. But let's define it, right? So, because if we can define it, then maybe we can build around it.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, cool. Rakai, whenever you're ready, my guy, let's pay some respects to our partners.
Take me off this table.
Yo, this your boy Miguel, and welcome to Common Conversations. Yeah, that's it. 2020 is behind us. It was crazy. It was all kind of new. And yo, we know how to pivot. This is 2021. Let's get it in. And I want to have you on the show. Come podcast with me. Let's go live. Let's sit down and talk about all the good, the bad, the ugly, the green, the funny? Yo, y'all know how we do it. This is Gelly Gel, this is Common Conversations, and I'm inviting you to come tell your story. Let's go.
Indiana's own Dana Black here, and if you're anything like me, you get tired of waiting on the Indiana media to cover the issues that matter to Hoosier liberals, progressives, and Democrats. Our issues and candidates seem to always get ignored. Now, you don't have to wait to hear from left-leaning blue politicians regarding the issues that matter to us. Turn Left is your information source. Join us each Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live. Turn Left, Indiana politics from the left side of things.
Start it up.
Welcome back. This is your boy Gelly Gel. This is Common Conversations, and I got more questions. Y'all got questions? Y'all welcome to ask us questions. So here's the thinking, right? So we're sitting here with Angelique, and I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna maybe just tip the scale a little bit as we continue this conversation. But I want us to define equity, right? So, or at least attempt to define what equity looks like to us as entrepreneurs, and how do we? So, equity, number one, and then two, how do we break the cycle? Maybe what are some steps that we could do to break the cycle and the training that has been instilled on us, in us, and on us as it relates to going after funding, as it relates to starting businesses, and so that we can almost break the chains, break the shackles of the limitations that other people have put on us, right? Because a lot of times, the thing about systemic racism specifically is that it becomes a mindset, right? And when the Black community has been told, no, you can't, you're not worthy, it becomes something that is over and over and over again. So even if the opportunity exists, sometimes as a community, we're like, it's not for us because we've been told. And on the other hand, you take a situation like Tulsa, right? 100 years ago, right? The United States and white people go into Greenwood and kill and burn down. Something that we call Black Wall Street, one of the most wealthiest, thriving communities. And that's just one, because it's happened consistently across the United States. And it even happens today, except for we're not blowing up houses, we're not killing people, but there's an intention to destroy Black-owned businesses. We may or may not dive into that. Maybe there's some examples, maybe not. But I'm gonna lead with this as we begin to try to define what equity is. A few years ago, I was sitting with a client, white business, and that particular client told me, if I had hired a white person to represent me and I took a step back from my business would do better financially. And that was here in Jeffersonville. And then I remember another time where I wanted to acquire a building that was on the market, and I know that they were offering it for $85,000, and when I wanted to buy it, they offered it for $500,000. So what I'm currently defining is the lack of equity that's available. I've even come across when we've done situations where bid. So I went after a bid for PR, and the mayor at the time, I remember sitting in a room as everybody was talking about it. My office was over on 10th Street here in Jeff, and the mayor stood up in the room and said, well, we don't have a PR firm who can do the work. And I said, fool, I'm standing right here. I'm the only PR firm over here. And they hired this white lady out of Arizona to come here to do work that I was partially doing for volunteer already. And then when they finally rolled out that contract, it was funny because there was a company in New Albany had to call me to get the pictures. So, equity. Like I said, if we don't name it, if we can't share, if you don't understand what's really happening, then it's really hard to say, how do we fix it? Right? And as Suge said, you can't fix it because it ain't broke. So how do we redesign it in a way that's for us? So I'll start. Equity for me, is an equal playing ground, right? It's opportunity for ownership, because we know by history and by data, the American dream is about owning land, property, right? It was about having a whole bunch of kids. Ain't nobody trying to do all that. But those were the primary, ways to basically building wealth in this country. And we know that there's consistently, either whether it's a law or a rule or an ordinance, that has limited us, the people of color, unable to do that. So again, equity for me is ownership, right? Having the same opportunities as my white counterparts, right? So going to get that loan and not having to put that I'm black on there.
Yeah.
That's equity, right? That's an equality position. And I keep going, but so when you think about it, what is it to you?
I mean, to me, it really is, during 2020, there was always this famous meme kind of caricature of white person and a black person in a race. And, of course, a black person's got all this weight on their back. They're also about a quarter mile behind the white person, and the white person's sitting right on the start line. And they're like, hey, start, go. You all have the same equal opportunity to win this race. And to me, equity really would be, both people on the same starting line. Okay, that's just a start of equity, though, because even if we get to the same starting line, the question is, when the race goes and the gun goes off, am I going to have the same shoes you have when the gun goes off?
Do I have shoes on at all?
Do I have shoes on at all? Then, okay, let's say all things were fair when we started, this race. Okay, so now we're in the race. Where did you put me, on the inside curve or the outside curve? Am I going to have someone going to be dumping stuff on the track when I'm running? I mean, so to me, we are perceived to start at the same point, but we're not really starting at the same point because, like you said, the rules of the game change when we're in the race. So, he might be going, down the straightaway, nothing going on, and I got a whole, mud forest I'm running through. So to me, equity is not just the equal access and equal opportunity.
Okay.
To me, access is equal opportunity and also equal consideration.
Oh, wow.
So,
equal consideration. Let's go.
We don't get equal consideration. Like you said, that it really comes down to, they said for you it's $500,000, but that's because they weren't considering you with the same equality of mindset as the white counterpart. But the problem with that definition is you can't define it. You really can't dig it out.
No.
It really has to, because you can't get in somebody's mind and prove. It was like I was reading this article today that was, going back and talking about what we all know about the Nixon era and the war on drugs. And talking about one of Nixon's advisors, said, well, we were against hippies and we were against black people. So we got marijuana, it was really just code for get rid of hippies, and crack was just code for destroy black people, And so he was like, that was their strategy. But you can't prove, now he's coming, he said this back actually in the 90s.
Yeah.
Right? And people are still debating whether the war on drugs is about race or not. And this is a man who created the war on drugs, telling you with his own lips it was about black people. It was not about the drugs. And we still refuse to see that. But what I'm saying is you can't prove, outside of him confessing it, you can't prove that that's what it was about.
Not at all.
You can't,
No,
you really can't.
I don't remember the documentary. Y'all can go look it up because, whatever. Something, here, I'm going to teach y'all a new phrase, too, as I can jump into this statement. My wife calls me and she says I fact fictionize, and a lot of times because I'll say stuff that you need to prove. So there was this documentary. I was probably slightly inebriated while I was watching it, so I can't tell you what the name is. But they were talking about marijuana, since you brought up marijuana, and you brought up drugs and economics. So you said marijuana was to go after the hippie. This particular documentary broke down that weed was actually made a class 1 drug to go after the jazz musicians, which were predominantly black,
And I
who
can
were
believe
earning
that.
wealth through the entertainment system, entertainment industry.
Oh, yeah.
And so that they could control. So here's the thing, and you know, somebody out there tell me what amendment it is, because there's a particular amendment that's still in the Constitution that says the only way you can create a slave, right, is if you have a felony. So think about it.
Yeah.
If I make marijuana a class A drug, class 1 drug, equivalent to heroin, 13, 14, 13? 4, all right, there it is, 13. So if I can do that, then I'm taking the #1 base of wealth development, right? And I'm putting all those people on a block, or now I can start arresting them. We can give them felonies, right? Which means in most communities they lose their rights. We're taking their wealth opportunities from them. So I mean, that's sick.
Yeah, and the one thing that they were pointing is they were like, Nixon had his ideas of the war on drugs.
Yeah.
His term was short-lived. Every president since then has had their hidden agenda on the war on drugs. So it's, like you said, it evolves over time into this ever-growing beast of whatever. But when we think about, I mean, we're talking about wealth, we're talking about entrepreneurship, you know, that ties into it just the same. And so for me, you know, it's hard to get these things, when racism goes underground, then it really is hard to dig it rooted out, because you're basically, the people that are oppressing you really have to, they have all the control. They have to change their own mindset, right? It's not my responsibility to change it, and I can't ever possibly change your mind. They'd have to actually decide that we're no longer going to oppress. But it's about wealth, so why would I? It's not in my best interest to decide that. I always say, if you look at a lot of the programming for entrepreneurship, the funding for Black founders, the training and things like that, it's like when you start looking at it, why don't we measure those programs against, are they generating a lot more revenue? Are they bringing a lot more capital? And it's almost like those programs are designed, on the surface it's like it's about helping, but sometimes it's like, yeah, but you don't want me to supersede in your mind whatever seat you have. And I say in your mind, because sometimes people are running those programs and I hate to say it, they just aren't credentialed.
Wow.
So if I'm running and I'm not credentialed, the thought of you becoming this billionaire from your company and I'm training you, it's almost like that they're not intentionally sabotaging, but they in their mind there's a limit to how big you can get as a Black company, because I haven't attained this limit in my life.
You know, so I've seen that. So you're degreed, Ph.D. doctor, yay. I'm not that, maybe one day. But I have 2 degrees in business management, and I've faced that in a sense that when I've sat across the room from folks, my white counterparts who have no degrees, who are making 6 figures in this particular community. And I remember one time I went on a job interview because I was like, all right, I got to get a job. I got to do this thing. And I remember they offered me, like, it was the most insulting ass thing ever. And they thought it was okay, right? So they offered me like $40,000 a year. And I thought to myself, even without my degrees, I'm worth way more than that, you dumbass.
Mercy.
You know what I mean? But I thought, how insulting. But then I realized that, the person who's interviewing me makes way more than I do, way more than I'm asking for, and they don't have the degrees, and they're not even close to being as skilled and or as talented. That might be a little bit of ego, but I believe in it.
Yeah.
So when we're facing that and we're talking about wealth, growth, equity and opportunities, we're already surrounded by those obstacles. So folks feel like if they're fair, if equality and equity exists, then they're losing.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there's more than enough money to go around.
Yeah.
There's more than enough resources to go around. And then if it was a level playing field, we would all win.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
And 9 times out of 10, I'm not even in your lane.
There's that too.
Yeah, there's ample reason why this should not be a concern, but it's an unhealthy fear. I'm going to say this is a sexist thing, but I'm using it because it resonates with me. But you could apply it also to kind of the white and Black context. And they said, what was it? Most men have an unhealthy fear that they're going to attract gold diggers who are going to go after money that they actually don't have. So I feel like in this context, most of the people from the majority of population have an unhealthy fear that I'm going to take money from them, right, for me operating in a lane that they're not even in, like that they don't have, right? I'm in entrepreneurship. You might be over here, you know, mopping the floor. What do we have got to talk about? You're not trying to go after these contracts. So why? So it's an unhealthy fear of you being competing with me. You win, I lose.
So that brings a thought to my mind, right? You know, we talk about our community and our companies and everybody's on this DEI thing. You know, it's a beautiful thing. I think it's just conversation for most of them, to be honest with you, because I think if they're actually going to do something, there would be an action, not a let's spend hours trying to label it. But so the point I want to make is this: so you create these companies are out here, white, black, green, yellow, otherwise, right? They're thriving and they're saying, hey, you know, we want to be inclusive in nature. I'm curious, how do they, or do they even recognize, and maybe this is a question to whoever's watching, you know, do you recognize the people that work for them, do they recognize the people that work for them who do not believe in diversity, inclusion, and equity, right, but are in charge of systems, right? Like they're head of HR, they're the vice president, they're the CFO. You know, the company is screening on a banner, you know, we believe in diversity, but the heads of your company don't.
Yep.
And how can we trust them to say we're going to help you build equity?
Yeah. I think people want things to happen overnight. I know people want things to happen overnight. And I was on, I don't say the company's name, but I was on, I was on like a Crows Group session with the CEO of one of the prominent medical device companies. And I made this statement, and I could tell that for him it was an uncomfortable statement that I made, only because he realized that it was not something he could attain in his life cycle. So, in other words, what you really would have to do to address that problem is start screening, weeding out people when they come in the door. Like if I'm hiring people for when I'm hiring people for my company, right? We're doing hiring now. We're looking to hire 2 people. Diversity, first of all, is a question on our interview thing. And I don't just want to know, are you for diversity or not? I'm like, well, tell me a time. Have you worked with a diverse group of people before? You know, and I'm listening to what they're saying. And then and then we question, okay, let's see, okay. But you have to, don't hire them in the first place if they don't care about inclusion, if they don't care about equity, and so when I made this statement, it was I could tell he was kind of like, because why? Because that would mean I'd have to fire everybody that I currently have that has that mentality. And furthermore, I'd have to, go through all this. It's not something that they're willing to do. So what do I do instead? I try to do the same thing that we've been doing. We're gonna try and hire more black people, or, and it's just like, it's just going to happen by osmosis, the people that are hiring them, And then when they get in, there's no retention because they're treated terribly.
Yeah, true story.
Because you still have the bad apples in your company that you refuse. And the bad apples hire other bad apples, by the way. So the problem is it's a exponential problem because you left those bad apples in there and then you gave them control to hire other people. So who are they going to hire? People that identify with them. So to me, it's just like you just have to.
So you threw the banner out there.
You got to do a clean slate.
But yeah, so you got to wipe it out.
You got to wipe it out.
So, got to wipe it out and start over. So let's talk about procurement. These procurement programs that we have, right? Because Jeffersonville doesn't have a procurement program, right? So they don't even try to be the minority goal, right? They can care less. Our mayor sucks. Yeah. I said that. No, he doesn't. He's great for somebody, just not us.
Yeah.
So I don't think New Albany has a procurement program either. I know Louisville has one, right? They have a whole bunch of them, and sometimes it's a win and sometimes it's a loss. So I'm wondering this whole equity thing, because the equity piece is still limited to just the select few. These particular Negroes are great, not these over here.
Yeah.
How can we challenge, I'm just gonna say white institutions, right? To move beyond the certification thing, right? So if we're saying, like, I believe inclusion would be saying, hey, we've got we'll just keep it simple, $1 million contract.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, we're going to go look for 10% of the black community who's in the entrepreneur space, and then we're going to make them go get certified to prove that they're black. And then we're going to make them expose themselves financially to prove to us that they deserve an opportunity, but their white counterpart doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Do you think we could legitimately convince or put a change position where that $1 million contract comes out and the people who are over that say, we're giving 50% of it to the black community?
I mean, they should. I don't, to be quite honest, I don't think it'll ever happen, right? Because it goes back to, I give you that, I feel like I'm losing. But to answer your question about, but there are companies that are moving away from the certification process and are doing their own certification process. Okay. And so, it might be Google, might be one of them. I don't know if Google's one of the ones that are doing it, but there are major companies that are moving away. In my space, we have companies that are moving away from that. So I have all the certificates, like you name it, I got it. Yeah. And it is a very intrusive process. And it's foolish.
Yeah, it is.
Because it was something stupid like are you black? Okay, well, yeah, I'm black, Okay, send us your ID,
Yes.
Okay, here's my ID. I'm black, I guess, I mean, like the previous panel talked about, since black is ambiguous anyway, just judging off my skin tone, I'm black, right? So I fall within the race that you determined already. So then it was something crazy like, they wanted to know when my parents, it was something crazy. Like they wanted, my mother's, my parents were black, but my mother had passed away. And so they made me get my mother's death certificate to prove that I was black. And my mother just passed away a month prior. I was like, are you serious? I had to call my dad, who was still grieving, and say, can you get my mother's death? And he still remembers that because 2 weeks ago I was with him. I didn't think he remembered. He was like, I had to get your mother's death certificate for your sister. I was like, and it's ruining my family.
Yeah, absolutely, that's ridiculous.
But how many ways can I? So I don't. Now they say that they do this, but we're doing this to protect, you all, so that, white people don't pretend to be. And I'm like, yeah, but they're still pretending.
Yes, they are.
And it's not actually protecting us. And this is ridiculous. I don't, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. It's not necessary.
I had to give them my mother's birth certificate.
Yeah.
And I just was like, she was born in Panama. She's been in the United States since she was a kid. Why do you need it, right? What are we proving by my mother's birth certificate? So it's, so here's a program, right? They're like, oh my God, you got to be minority certified, as if it opens the door for opportunity. And I'm like, it really doesn't. It opens up the opportunity for you to scrutinize us and judge us even more so based on some hidden criteria that you have. And then you say, well, when 10% is available, we'll let you compete for it. It's almost like, I remember when I was younger, I took a group of wealthy white kids to New Mexico on a trip. And we went to the reservations. And there was a day that we spent in the square in Albuquerque, and the guy was telling us a story. One of the native folks was telling a story that, in the early development, the native folks would have to come down in lottery in order to sell to the community. And they could only come down once or twice a year, right? So all the native folks would stand in this lottery. Hopefully they get picked. And then they can sell or trade their wares with the community. And this is how they fed their families, this is how they built a reservation. And I said, okay, cool. I was like, that is crazy, right? And they still kind of have that today down there, right? But that's but that's how I feel the minority certification program is. It's like, okay, we're gonna gather up all the black people who have black businesses, and we're gonna lottery off who we identify as the best, right? And we're doing this for the sake of equality and equity and inclusion in our community, right? And then they can't really even measure the success of it, even though they want to scream, look what we're doing for black-owned businesses. You can find one that you did something for.
And then it moves into the buddy system. Get yourself a good white company and pair yourself up with them, and then they give you peanuts on the contract, and then so that the system is not working, I think, as it needs to be working.
So how do we, and we can't tackle this here, but this is just part of the conversation, because I think this is the conversation we have to have off the books, is how do we redefine this thing? right? How do we be daring? Like, I think this would be the greatest experiment ever if we could get the powers that be who truly believe that equity and equality are important, and that we can honestly change this thing. If we could put them we could all get into a room and begin to truly map this out like we would do it in any other business.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even intellectually challenging. It's just a will and a desire to be equitable. And it goes back to that mindset of, do you really want us to join the game, or do you not want us to join the game? Are you going to be serious about this or not? And sometimes also, I mean, sometimes, like I said, it's not complicated, but sometimes people, they only know their lived experience.
Okay.
So in their mind, they're like, maybe if their lived experience is like, oh, this is all about just making sure you guys don't get screwed over by having white people posing as, minority enterprises.
Well, I mean, they classify white women as a minority now, so I mean, we didn't have to do that. They did that.
Yeah, they did, but they still have a woman-owned business. But still, but same thing. Like to me, it's like I just don't feel like the solutions are complicated. I think it's more you have to have the willpower, the desire to do it, to simplify things. I was working with, an organization over in Louisville that had some grant funds, and they said, well, is there a better way to review applicants, Black-led organizations, to give out these funds? Does it really need to be as complicated as it has been in the past? Do we need a 20-page application, or can it just be a 1-page, or maybe not even 1 page? Can we just tell them talk for 5 minutes or 3 minutes and send us your audio recording? Do we need to have all of this stuff that we say makes a better applicant, but doesn't really make a better applicant? And I think the same thing goes when you're talking about procurement. I think also, like in my space, what does procurement mean in the medical device industry? Because they always have so many things. Like, well, we only have to go after a minority supplier if they're a viable option. But if we're all blocked from being a viable option because of systemic things, like, oh, if I want to sell to your company, it's like, well, but we want, a 30-year track record with the FDA. What? My founder's doing 30, like,
Yes.
we want to, we got to have a 60-year, your company's got to have a 60. It's just like, I'm never going to win against somebody, and they can always say, well, it's about making the safest medical device. So we went with this other company because they've been in the industry for 100 years and got a track record and got all this clinical data that says that, their technology is great. But we are just starting to enter into a lot of fields. Like, I have a friend, she's the first Black woman to get her Ph.D. in computer science. I think she's still the only one.
Wow.
From the University of Michigan. We graduated at the same time. So we're just entering into the marketplace, entering into the race, even from behind. So if you're going to evaluate, if you're going to set the standard all the way up here, needlessly, by the way, then that's another way also that we get knocked out from some of those procurement opportunities, because they just say, well, we went with...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we run into that. I mean, we realize that the wealth position, we're far behind the years, right? Because when slaves were let free, they weren't allowed to have businesses, right? And we got Jim Crow South, and people think Jim Crow was just limited to the South, and the reality of it is that Jim Crow was all over the country, right? The North took a very strong part in limiting opportunities for Black people, and still do, right? So North, South, whatever, right? This is an American problem. This is America as a whole. And so when we look at that, many of us, I don't care what industry we're in, are still first generation. There are not a lot of second generation or third generation Black-owned corporations. And a lot of that has to do with systemic issues. It really does, in terms of funding, in terms of how people do business. I mean, even think about it from an employment standpoint. I think we just received our first African-American CEO of a multi-blah, blah, blah company. That's in hundreds of years, right? I know we've got to wrap this up because we got other people to come in and chit-chat, and Teah's got another segment that we're going to do. And again, these conversations are about getting started. It's about braving it. It's about figuring out what to ask, what not to ask, and realizing that ask anything, ask everything as much as we can, so that we can learn, and then be daring enough to put an action forward to say, you know what, this is what we're going to do next, and this is how we're going to do it. But for, again, not even but for, as we continue these conversations, and I'm going to say this specifically because Teah said it early in the last segment, our future has a past. And when we're talking about economics in this country, you have to understand that this country was built on slavery, which is an economic system.
Yeah.
The Jim Crow South was an economic system. Minority certification is an economic system, right? The systemic issues that we face today still and will be facing tomorrow until we legitimately correct the issues is an economic. And if we're not daring to change that, then there's that. So ask yourself, why did we create slavery? Not we, because I did. And I know some white people are saying, I didn't either, but America did, right? And white privilege allows you to benefit from that creation, right? That economic system. Why does it still exist in policy, both public and private? And when we're talking, specifically within our region, have you done the due diligence? Have our chambers done the due diligence to really peel back those policies and say, if we're really supporting DEI or DIE, whatever it is, because I keep messing up, I'm gonna say RIDE. If you really gonna ride with us,
yeah.
Are you really willing to look at your system and say, we need to change it?
Yeah.
And this is how
as
we're
a true ally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not as
I want a friend, I
pretend
want an ally. You know why?
Yeah.
Because allies have different agendas when we
That's
win.
true. Oh, yeah.
And you can stand with me and you can
Yeah.
fight and have a completely different agenda, but you standing there waving a flag saying I'm an ally.
Oh yeah. That right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
Because I watched we're gonna rap, because I was in the protest, right? We were in there when the LMPD beat up that woman. I didn't mean to say that, I did. But so there was this black woman standing in the middle of the street. She was standing her fist up, and there was 3 white women. And this is the difference between an ally and a friend. Y'all really need to understand this. So the black woman standing there fist up, other white woman comes up, she's standing there fist up, and there's 2 other women that walk up and they're standing fist up. And when the police rolled up, 2 of the white women left. That's an ally. Because when we gotta go to war and we gotta fight and we gotta truly change what we're doing, allies leave.
Yeah.
I want friends in this fight.
Allies also turn, like you said.
Absolutely.
When we get to where we going to, then it's because the civil rights movement, there were a lot of allies riding, and women among them that got their rights.
Yes.
And we're gone. And we're gone. and we're gone. And we still trying to fight for our rights.
Yes.
So we got to have true friends.
True friends in this.
True friends in this, yeah.
So I appreciate you hanging out. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. On that note, Rakai, take us to commercial. We're going to get the next joint set up. This is your boy, Gelly. This is Common Conversation. And thank you for hanging out with us.
Yo, this your boy Gelly, and welcome to Common Conversations. Yeah, that's it. 2020 is behind us. It was crazy. It was all kind of new. And yo, we know how to pivot. This is 2021. Let's get it in. And I want to have you on the show. Come podcast with me. Let's go live. Let's sit down and talk about all the good, the bad, the ugly, the green, the funny. Yo, y'all know how we do it. This is Gelly. This is Common Conversations, and I'm inviting you to come tell your story. Let's go. On June 17th and 18th, we are inviting you to face a common conversation about race, inclusion, diversity, equity, and the impact systemic racism has had on white and BIPOC communities. Our esteemed group of panelists include Indiana's own Dana Black, Charlestown Mayor Treva Hodges, State Representative Cherish Pryor, and Louisville's own Tim Finley Jr., and a host of other influential community leaders. Join us as we embark upon brave and necessary conversations about the move forward.
Welcome back to I think it's our third segment for Common Conversations, our RIDE discussion, our race, inclusion, diversity and equity discussion. If you missed the first segment, that was hot. If you missed the second segment, it was hot. So hopefully you'll go back and you'll watch them. So we have a great panel this go round. And again, like I said, Miguel came up with the topics. So we're going to try to weave that in as best we can. So first, I would like to say this. There is a book out by Resma Menachem, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands. And I probably should have said this on the first segment. We all know that having discussions about race, having discussions about diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of times can, I'm a clinician, so I use the term triggering a lot, but I should frame it in the sense that can make us feel some kind of way. I do think it's important to note that even whether you are black, white, brown, whoever it is, that even if you have managed to stay with us and felt some kind of way, from this point, I would like for you to begin to actually recognize that you're feeling some kind of way and where you're feeling some kind of way, and take a deep breath and hang with us, because really feelings, even if they're not facts for you, they are indicators. So if I feel some kind of way about something, it's indicating something that I might want to be curious enough and courageous enough to explore. So with that being said, check your body, register it, write it down. You know, when that lady in the red dress said this, I felt hot, I felt cold, I felt scared, I felt all of that. Just make note of it and keep it rolling and put it in the chat. We doing a chat? Put it in the chat, and then, or just put it in your journal, whatever you got to do. But please be mindful of it. So with that being said, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. We already started a great conversation, so we're just gonna let you like jump in there, Maurice Ball, but I'll let him introduce himself. So we had already started a great conversation in the hallway, and we're just gonna continue it here. But if you would introduce yourself, and we'll just get this thing going. That's you first, Maurice Ball. Okay. Yes.
So Maurice Ball, I'm a entrepreneur, community leader, pastor. I run a mentorship program in the area, mentor kids 6th to 12th grade on life skills. I became a social activist over last summer, and just rocking. Out here trying to make a difference.
All right, thank you.
My name is Missy Smith. I am a social worker. I am a program manager for a local prevention program, but in this capacity, I am a volunteer with the Louisville Community Bail Fund. I'm labeled a reparationist and a abolitionist, and that's what I do in my night job. And I also am a co-leader for the anti-racism team at Highland Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky.
All right, awesome, thank you. Go ahead, you next.
Okay. My name is Nicole Bolden. I'm the Bloomington City Clerk. I am also the Deputy Chair for Cities and Towns for the Indiana State Democratic Party. And I'm really glad to be here to talk about everything.
All right. Well, welcome all of you. Thank you. So as we were outside trying to decipher what Miguel meant about these topics, so he just puts out words. So, you know, he's like, cultural engagement. This is going to be about cultural engagement, education, criminal justice, and something else. And I was like, well, what do we even mean by that? But we started to actually have a discussion first about culture. And I'm just gonna go ahead and bring it in. So we live in Southern Indiana, Jeffersonville, Indiana. So we're close to New Albany, Indiana, Clarksville, Sellersburg, Charlestown, all that. And then we got, you know, Louisville across the way. So Missy, we started to have this discussion about the culture of niceness. The culture of niceness. I just want to start with you on that. So let's talk about the culture of niceness here, because that's what we like to be seen as. Like it's nice to live here and everybody gets along, and we don't really have those problems because everybody is nice.
Yes. So the culture of niceness, the way I see it, is niceness is almost the pinnacle of what a white person and a white middle-class people ascribe to. We want to be nice. But nice serves the privileged. Nice serves to keep people comfortable. And when we speak truth, we're no longer nice. And when we make people uncomfortable with the truth, we're no longer nice. When I walk into certain rooms, I can see the face like, oh, it's that girl again. And because I'm going to tell the truth, I'm never going to be mean, never. But I'm going to tell the truth. And when you see people here say, well, I'm not racist because I am friends with, that's because you're nice and they're nice to you, but someone's not telling the truth and someone's not naming the harm that is being done even in that space and in that friendship. So niceness just serves to keep white people comfortable and everyone else uncomfortable, but with a smile on their face, because that's how we're nice.
Oh, wow. Anybody else want to jump in there or add to that?
I mean, where to start? I mean, it's not just down here. You know, I live in Bloomington, so I'm a little bit further north, but it pretty well covers the Midwest. I mean, there's the Midwest nice. Right. So, I mean, I grew up in Iowa. We're nice, you know. Indiana, nice. I mean, this is what we do. We're nice people, but it is harmful, and you can talk about how it harms our girls. I mean, that was one of the things we were talking about, how being nice can be harmful to women. You know, when you say be nice, you know, you don't want to interrupt somebody when they reach out to touch you, or can I touch your hair? You know, and you don't want to say no because that's not nice. Right. You know, and say, you know, you should smile more. You're so pretty. I know.
Talk less, smile more. Hamilton, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. I don't care how you feel about it, you need to see it.
But, you know, and it perpetuates the sense of you have to be nice, but you're being inauthentic when you do that. And it is not a good thing. And if you can live with the pain of somebody not being nice to you, then you might actually get to a real place and be able to move forward and into something different.
And I think that's where it starts at. It's you got to peel back the layers so we can get down to the nitty gritty of really what's going on. And your niceness covers up racism. Your niceness covers up whatever else is in your heart towards whatever other people group. Because you can be nice. There's Midwest nice and then there's Southern nice. I lived in the South, and there's a different kind of nice. Well, one of the things I like about some of the people in the South were, if they didn't like you, they wasn't nice to you. And I can dig that. I can take you, I'd rather know who I'm dealing with right up front so I can know how to respond, and opposed to me engaging with you, thinking that you ride with me, and then all of a sudden you're not. So I'll take you, I'll take your whoever you are, and you not have to be nice to me. Doesn't change that I don't have change the fact that I'm gonna still be nice to you though, because you win people over with love.
So wait, okay, so I wanted to dig into that just a little bit, because so now we're talking about what that looks like. So Southern niceness looks like what?
Southern niceness is if you're included in what they, I mean, like if they accept you, then it's almost like the good old boy network. So I was in a space where I was the only black guy, and I was okay with being a token black guy, because I understood that in that space there was resources. Outside that space there was no resources. So until I got into the space, they wasn't nice to me. But when I got into the space, it took one cat that had a bunch of old money to validate me with everybody else who had money. And then I was able to navigate and operate the system by being the only black guy. And I was cool with that. And so now it was nice, but if you was on the outside
of it,
nah, they wasn't gonna talk to you, they were gonna look at you crazy, they gonna walk right past you.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right, Midwestern nice. What's Midwestern nice? Because I think this is important. This is important because, you know, I'm sure that in this process of moving forward, it's important for folks to be able to see themselves, you know, not just in a way where, and again, if you have that little feeling of, you know, to see themselves in the conversation that we're talking about. So it's, you know, I know that we say things generally, but what are some of the examples? Because you gave some really good examples of what Southern niceness looks like. What does Midwestern, Southern Indiana, even Bloomington, I don't know what is Bloomington categorized? Central Indiana, whatever, what is
It
that?
depends on what part of the state you're in as to how they categorize Bloomington.
You know what, America.
You know, I can't help you. If I'm in the northern part of the state, they call it Southern. If I'm in this part of the state, they call it Central. I can't help you with it.
Yeah, so
It is what it is.
Okay, so what does Midwestern niceness look like? What is that behavior? What is that behavior?
What would you call it, Miss?
I think it's making people comfortable, keeping people comfortable. And you know that there are certain things we don't talk about. We don't talk about race, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about religion because it makes people uncomfortable. Yes. And we don't tell the truth. If you have something in your family history in the Midwest, you don't talk about that. So you have trauma that you can't bring up to the top. And what this is all if you have trauma because of race, if you have trauma because of religion, we don't talk about that because it makes people uncomfortable. And that to me is that niceness. Walk around with a smile, follow the rules, be the norm. And that could be, as a mother of a gay child, don't let your child act a certain way because it makes people uncomfortable. Don't let him name that he wants to marry a man. That makes people uncomfortable. If you are in a gay couple, if you are a gay man in a relationship, don't hold hands with that person. That makes people uncomfortable. But you're still nice, and everyone's nice to you and smiles at you while you are dying inside.
Or if we're going to talk about race specifically, sometimes it's just as simple as even naming race. To say something as simple as to name whiteness when you're talking to a white person is seen as not nice. You know, that's not a nice thing. We don't say that somebody is white. We don't say that somebody is black. That's not nice. And so I've been in spaces before where I've said something about, you know, as a black person or, you know, being in a predominantly white space and moving around here, and that was seen as not nice. The naming of the whiteness was seen as not nice, whereas for me, it's a matter of fact. I am one person in a room full of white people.
Yes.
Naming that is important if it's relevant to the discussion.
Yes.
But that may not be seen as nice.
Right.
So I think that's something that, you know.
It's the idea of color blindness also. Nice white people will say, I don't see color. And think that they're genuinely being nice, that that's a good thing to say, having no idea the impact that they're having on the people of color in the space.
Right. Which do you want to add to that? You got anything you want to throw in there?
Good.
Y'all, so you know, with that, because you're right. You know, the idea of color blindness and you're not supposed to see color. And, you know, what I noticed, and I'm going to try and get back to my point, is that oftentimes, like when I'm social mediaing, and, you know, there'll be discussions about race or racism, and you'll get this, you know, well, you're race baiting by even bringing it up. You're bringing up race by bringing it, and you know what? I have to check my body, and I have to be very careful because, and I'm gonna throw this out there, just the mentioning of race for some white people seems racist. I will say it is racial. Sure, it's racial. It is racial. So it is racial. It is not racist. So, I mean, there's this distinction to be made. So back to my point, what is the purpose of color blindness? What is the purpose of color blindness? Because apparently it's useful. It's useful. So I'm going to practice the things that are useful to me. I'm going to do it over and over and over and over again because something about it is helpful. What does it help?
I think that the goal for most people in color blindness, what they want is to treat people with equality. Okay. So I think what they are saying when they say, I'm colorblind, is they want to say, and I am treating you with equality, which may lead to the question of, is our goal equality or is our goal equity? Oof. Right? So I think that is maybe part of what our conversation should be here. Is it colorblindness? Is that my way of saying, but I want to treat you with equality, or do you want to treat people with equity? And then what does equity mean? Am I taking your line?
No.
Okay.
I'm just here. come on with it. Yeah, because you're exactly right. You're exactly right. So I don't know if y'all have anything y'all want to add to that.
When I hear color blindness, I'm kind of torn. I mean, on both sides of the coin, because we raised our son not to see color. Mm-hmm. So when we go do what we do in the community and help people, we don't care the race of the person, because I need you to look at, first, you're a human. And if I can look at you being a human, then I can have empathy for you, then I can help you. But when you say blindness, you know, meaning I can't see that color. When I'm walking in, it's evident, because if we walk into the same spaces, there's going to be two different things that happen.
Okay.
If I call the police on a white guy who's looking suspicious outside, they're going to laugh at me. If a white person calls and says there's a black guy looking suspicious in the neighborhood, it's a different response.
Right.
Even last segment, Miguel and the doctor said something about the race. And she said when the gun sounds, the race is running, or am I running in mud, or am I running? But I look at it and say, when the gun sound, was the gun pointed at me? When I don't say color blindness, we're in the same race, but the gun goes off, is the gun pointed at me? And so I'm dead from the beginning, and that person gets to run the race without the thought of even having the gun pointed at them.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to try and stay on track, because now I'm starting to think about trauma. I am, because it is that. And there was something else that you said. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, Missy.
Well, I love the idea of equity versus equality, and then bringing the idea of the system into that. What does equity in the system look like? And then, when you, like you said, when you call the police, it's not equal, and what is equity? What would equity be in that situation?
Yes. Go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
I was just thinking about the idea of raising your children to see the whole person first. I think that's the ideal, right? I mean, that's the goal. That's what we're all leading toward.
Yes.
But I don't think you ever want to erase, which I think is the problem with color blindness. When people say color blindness, I don't think it's their intent, but I think what people hear is the erasure.
Yes.
So, and that's where the disconnect is, right? Because I think people hear you're erasing my personhood somehow.
Erasing what? So let's go back to that. So you said erasing my personhood, erasing what? Because there's more to that. My personhood, my this, my that. When you don't see who I am as a black person, as a brown person, what are they erasing or discounting or minimizing? So erasing, discounting, or minimizing. Yes.
That's all of it.
Yeah, whatever it means to that particular person in their racial identity, as they see themselves. You know, and there's some people who do not identify themselves as a racial person.
Yes.
So for them, it may not mean anything.
Right.
But for some people who strongly identify as a member of a particular racial group, that may mean everything. And that's where it becomes so problematic. So
I think that you're right about that too. You know, that one, hopefully we all get to define ourselves, just as individually get to define ourselves, because I know I know some black and brown people and biracial folks that don't choose, and that's all right. You don't choose that. So if that's not something that lands on you, then great. But you said something about, oh my gosh, I wrote this down. That it was about not seeing color and seeing your humanity, and how that, I think that ideally that is excellent, but then I translated that into, if I see your color, I can't see your humanity. If I can't see your color, or if I can see your color, if I see it, then I can't see your humanity. I see black means this, brown means this, indigenous folk, Asian folk, that means this. So if I'm seeing your color, that means I've taken you from being a human being to being whatever that color means. And when we talked about race and the development of race, I got to go back because we have to tie it in for people. So whiteness meant this. Oh no, Anglo. Anglo-Saxon, all that, meant this. Negroid meant this. Mongoloid meant this. It was horrible. But really, even though those terms changed, the meaning and the values of those things did not change. And this is just a thought. If those ideas are ingrained and there is some awareness of that, then those who may be trying to do the nice thing, it's much better. This is just a thought and an idea. It's much better if I don't even admit that you have a color. Because if you have a color, that means all this stuff that I'm trying to push back or suppress is gonna come up, and I might really not be okay, even though it comes out anyway. It comes out in the behavior anyway. I like them, but maybe just not for this. Or they're a really nice person, but maybe it'd be better over here. Or you know what, I know they're smart, but maybe just not in this thing here. Or, hey, let's invite them to this meeting. You know what, but great idea, don't think they can carry it out, but we can take that. Woo, let me let you in and take your stuff.
But that's the pattern.
As we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, allowing folks in the room, because we get stuck on diversity and yeah. Woo.
I mean, diversity just means you're in the room. Don't mean that you don't have nothing to say. Equity means that you got a seat at the table. So if I'm in the room, I'm just in the room. That says, hey, I just got a butt in the seat. Mm-hmm. I'm in the room. Yeah, we diverse. Look at the room. Yeah, but when it comes to decision making, I'm at the table.
But even if you're at the table, right? So there's diversity, equity, and I'm hoping, I don't know if they defined it in the session before this one, having a clear definition of what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually is, because I've walked in a room where there's we have a very diverse room, and it was an exercise in white people exploring the diversity of white people. so we've got older folks, so we've got some, and we got some veterans, and we got people from the LGBTQ community, and we got some women, and we have so we have this diverse room, and we are exploring the diversity of white people. So I think I gotta lay that out there, because I'm not sure that people being nice and kind of, are seeing that, or maybe they are and aren't aware of it. So I communicate at the level of people's awareness. So let's bring it to the start. We got a few minutes going there, but were you going to say something? I forgot. I feel like I cut you off.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh. All right, well, I think that culture of bringing about that culture of niceness and color blindness. How does this help or hinder our progress, I guess, with diversity, equity, inclusion? How does this, and these systems that we're working in? So, I mean, we've mentioned systems. I don't know if we're going to be able to bring that in. But how does this culture of niceness help or hinder the progress that we're making?
We can't fix what we don't name. and what we don't see. And when we make people comfortable, especially when we make white people comfortable, they do not have the opportunity to see what could be different. Can you see a different world? Because this world looks really good to you, but it was built for you and by you. If we really want everyone to have a seat at the table, what does that look like? And until we name that, we cannot move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I kind of want to piggyback on that. I know we're about to wrap that up. Is looking at it's not just white people doing the niceness, and I think you'd given examples of the other type of niceness. And I think it's important to challenge what our role is. And I'll say that in particular, I was brought up here. So I have been very well trained and groomed, and it was implicitly done, you know, how to make sure that white people stay comfortable, white people and older people. Make sure to make sure that they stay comfortable. So even sometimes during the course of this conversation, or Lord knows with Miguel's conversations, sometimes I'm doing this. Because inside me I'm thinking, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen if I'm not nice? I already know what happens when Miguel's not nice. I already know. So I think that's a very, very important note. We will pick that back up after we come back, and it'll probably be Miguel finishing this up because I have to run because I double booked. And so thank you all for joining us. Go get you some water, take your bathroom break, take your notes, do what you gotta do, and we'll see you back in about, I don't know, however many minutes. Okay.
Indiana's own Dana Black here, and if you're anything like me, you get tired of waiting on the Indiana media to cover the issues that matter to Hoosier liberals, progressives, and Democrats. Our issues and candidates seem to always get ignored. Now, you don't have to wait to hear from left-leaning blue politicians regarding the issues that matter to us. Turn Left is your information source. Join us each Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live. Turn Left, Indiana politics from the left side of things.
Guess what? Y'all thought Teah was gonna be sitting here. Joke's on you, Jack. So here's the thing, right? This segment is her segment, but she told you that she was trained to be a certain way. She talked about, you know, her role, being trained to make white people feel safe, right? I had that once. I was wee little lad. No, I grew up I was in Marysville, Ohio, and I was in maybe 5th or 6th grade. And these white kids used to chase me home. They used to call me nigger every day. They used to try to beat me up. They used to jump me. And then my mom sat me down, and she said, "Baby," I said, "What?" She said, "You know you can beat up white people." And I said, "I can? They ain't gonna kill me? They ain't gonna lynch me?" And she was like, "Nah," because you know I've been trained at that point that if you hit a white person, you was gonna be murdered. And so I went to school the next day. Yeah, let's just say the N-word was ceased to exist, or you got punched in the eye. But, so I wasn't trained, you know, I kind of left that world of making white people feel easy, right? The reality of it is, for me in my world, like, you should be making me feel safe. I should be able to walk into your environment and not feel like I have to protect myself from you. We know that's not necessarily true, but I love where y'all was going in the dynamic, and I know dynamics shift, but yeah.
So you're recentering. You're centering yourself as opposed to centering whiteness.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Shouldn't we all do that though?
Try.
Try?
Try.
I mean, so this training, like, cause y'all, we all come from different spaces, and we've all been trained to deal with this differently. And you, as the only Missy, as the only white person on the panel, you know, I mean, interesting how you were trained to even deal with black people growing up, or if there was.
Oh, yes.
So you start.
My mom won't see this, so it's all right. I grew up in a very racist home,
Okay.
and it was overtly. It wasn't the niceness, and the words just felt wrong in my spirit, even at a very young age. I knew something was wrong. But it took intentionally seeking out and seeking spaces outside of whiteness to unlearn that and even name it and recognize it and work on unlearning it. But no, I grew up in a very overtly racist home.
Got you.
Personally, I cannot remember a time I didn't have a white friend. Honestly, I cannot remember, probably preschool or something like that, but I cannot remember there was not a time that a white family didn't live in the hood.
Okay.
That we became friends. So I really didn't experience it because we just looked at them as us. So I wasn't really trained on how to interact with white people because we just all hung out. You know what I mean? Except my granddad. Now, I remember my granddad used to own a company in Cincinnati, and I was out working with him one day, and he had me out there grinding. And I was like, "You Uncle Tom?" Woo! That was probably the wrong thing to say. And that joker snatched me up. And I mean, and I don't know what the words did, what hurt him. You know what I mean? Like, now I look back, I was like, man, that was foolish, because I called him out as his grandson in front of all these white people, and then know it made him feel some kind of way. And so he actually whooped me. And he didn't say why he whooped me, but he just whooped me.
It was.
I mean, I know he was probably his pride and everything else that was in there that he probably was just like crushed on the inside. Now that I look back, would I say that now? No. If my son would say it, I would grind him in the grinder right now. But I look back and I was just like, I thought I was saying the right thing because I come from a different space where I don't have to act different around white people.
Yeah.
And you wanted me to act a certain way around white people, and that just didn't fit in what I was doing or how I was raised. And so yeah, that's like, but I cannot remember a time I didn't have a cool white friend that was.
I mean, I always had some cool white friends. I had to respect my white friends when I was younger more today than I did then, right? Because I didn't know what we were fighting, but I was fighting. Like, I would fight 14 of you at the same time. Like, we would go in. But I never really thought about, like, when my white friends, like one time we got jumped in Dublin, Ohio. And my buddy walked in, we walked into the Burger King, and this dude said, "What's this fucking nigger doing here?" And my buddy grabbed me and said, "Gelly, no." He was like, "Don't." Man, we mopped them, right? We went outside, but I put us in dangerous situations because I wouldn't stop or wouldn't think to say, if I respond in this, right? You know, where Teah was trained, like, if you respond in this, that's why she'd be like, you know, I know right now when Miguel getting ready to go in, it's another story. But the difference is too, I'm willing to get dirty. But I'm just curious, so training, like.
I mean, I grew up in Iowa City, Iowa.
Let's get it.
You know, so I mean, I was always the only black kid in the classroom.
Okay.
And if I wasn't, it was because for some reason my sister came down the hall to like give me something. I mean, that was it. It was just me. And that was all the way through, I don't know, maybe high school, when I could name every black kid in my high school.
Wow.
So, and a couple of them were my cousins. I mean, it just, that was what I grew up with. And then, you know, I came to Indiana and I was in Bloomington. You know,
it's
so
the same space, right?
Right.
it was very similar,
Okay.
you know, and it didn't change until, you know, I went to, well, I lived in Atlanta for a while in Dallas, you know, but I mean, that was where the shifts, you know, and I finally got to really spend time around more black people.
Wow.
And it was relief. It was, you know, it was kind of the comfort of saying, okay, this is much more natural.
Yeah.
So in terms of training, though, a lot of my family was from the South. So in terms of how you related to white people, it was really understanding there was a certain dynamic and a certain mold that you just did not break, you know. And in terms of how we treated white people much in the same way that we treated our elders. So there was not a lot of talking back. I cannot say that I adhere to that now,
Okay.
much to the everlasting dismay of some of my colleagues in city government, but this is what we live with. So
I'm curious too, you know, if this is what we live with, right? And we're all taught to deal with each other in a certain way, and we are in today's world, right? We have George Floyd, we have, you know, Trayvon Martin, we have Breonna Taylor, right? I guess in a sense, it's always been in this world. How do we change? I mean, well, let me say it this way: would you teach your kids how to engage with white people the same way you were taught or not taught, right? Or would you do something different? Whoever wants to take that one. I mean, does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I have a 15-year-old, and for a long time he was one of a handful of black kids in the school. One school, they had the list of the black kids, especially black males, and then they divided them out amongst the classroom evenly so that one classroom wouldn't have too many black males in it. No, I was in Charlotte.
Okay.
I was in Charlotte. And so they did that. Then when we went to Atlanta, and the part of Atlanta that we were in, he was still only one of a handful. But then this time he had a black teacher, which was cool. So he had never seen a black teacher before. Then we got to Alabama, and I was just thinking, yeah, I know I'm gonna have to choke somebody out because somebody's gonna say something wrong to my child, and I'm gonna have to. But surprisingly, the Metro of Birmingham is 75% black, so now he got a classroom full of black kids. Still no black teachers and no black administrators. So to teach him how to navigate, I'm just teaching him how to be able to be in any setting. I don't care if you're black, white, Korean, Hispanic. I need you to know how to function in any setting that you're in, and know that you're supposed to be. If you're in the room, you're supposed to be in the room. So I'm not teaching them how to say, when you're around white people, I need you to act like this. When you're around, I need you to act like you got some sense. Period. But I need you to act as the leader that we're trying to make you. You're a leader in a room, either full of leaders or you're leaders amongst any class of people that's in there. So that's what we try to teach.
Okay.
yeah, I don't know that there are direct lessons that we teach our kids anymore about, I shouldn't say anymore, at least in my house, there weren't direct lessons that we were teaching the kids about this is how you deal with this person or this person, other than dealing with adults, and you don't call adults by their first names, ever.
Okay.
So you would be Mr. Hampton. So
Gotcha.
They would never call you Miguel, even at this point, and they're in their 20s. So, but instead it is, you have a job. You are a student. You go to school. You do your work. You go to your job now as adults. You do your work. And you treat other people with respect and consideration and care.
Okay.
And no, it's not the color blindness that we were talking about earlier. It is about treating people with respect to their whole humanity. Now, I will say this. I've also tried to teach them to recognize when people are treating them poorly
For sure.
based on their race.
Yes.
Okay.
And
That's
or
good
their
stuff.
gender.
Yes.
And or their sexuality and or other factors that they may present in terms of their identity, because people will treat them badly based on whatever thing that they see, and they need to be able to recognize it and address it and nip it in the bud as quickly as possible, because that happens all the time. And you cannot raise black women in America and not be aware of it and be able to deal with it. That's different, and it's
What
not
makes it
about-
different?
Different because it's not saying I'm going to treat you differently based on who you are. It is saying I'm not going to let you treat me differently based on who I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go.
So that's the difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's good. Yeah.
Missy?
I mean, for me, I'm raising white children, so our goal is to make our children very aware of their whiteness, to name that and name what that looks like, and that these systems were built by and for white people, and what does it look like to disrupt those systems, because that's not okay. It's not okay, and knowing that naming your whiteness means you also name your privilege, and then you name the ways that you can dismantle that privilege. So they see me go into spaces that work to dismantle the justice system. And what does that look like? And dismantle the privilege in the justice system. They accompany me in that. We name what we see happening around us in relation to systems and power. Because if we just raised our children without intention, then they swim in their whiteness, they don't feel it, they don't see it, and it becomes the norm. When we make people aware of their whiteness, that's what makes them uncomfortable. Our goal is to make sure our children are always aware and always looking out then, okay, in the education system, when you see something happening, can you name the systems that are in power and who is benefiting from this, and how can you disrupt what's happening?
How do we teach adult white people to do that?
We name it, and we keep making them uncomfortable.
We should do a program specifically in Southern Indiana, just on that concept, right? I think that would be interesting.
On
That's
naming
hard.
whiteness.
Absolutely.
I did
Do
it.
you know I mean, do you know how difficult that is?
It
Because
is.
people get so uncomfortable when you start naming it.
Well, you know, one of the things, I did an implicit bias training for a local school. All the teachers and administration were white except 2. And I proposed a question to them, and this is why it's so hard to change, because they will never be in this space unless they go to a HBCU. I asked them, how many of y'all were adults before you encountered your first black person? 90% of everybody in there raised their hand and said, I was in my 20s before I encountered a black person. So they never have to shift and be the minority in anything. They never have to be in a space where they have to learn to adapt to us. We're always in spaces where we have to learn to adapt to them. And so even in my neighborhood, the candy store lady, of course, was the white lady who had the white kid in the neighborhood. The businesses in the neighborhood were businesses that were owned by white people. I went to a predominantly black school. We had a black principal, we had black administration, but the majority of my teachers were white. You're never in a space where they have to be the minority. So they can grow up in an all-white neighborhood, go to an all-white school, go to all-white college, go out into the workforce and be in all-white spaces and never have to adjust. That's where the niceness comes in. Now, this is where nice comes in, because now I'm being nice, because now when I flip that and have to put you as the minority, you have to make adjustments on how you interact and how you encounter this group of people. And so if you're never put in that space or never challenged to do that, then what happens is it gets perpetuated. It gets perpetuated. So if you wouldn't have broke the cycle and you was ingrained and indoctrinated by your parents, then you train and indoctrinate your kids, and then until somebody says, you know what, we need to break this and we need to put ourselves in spaces to where we have to make the adjustment culturally.
And that's where we are, right? That's why we're sitting here. We're saying Southern
Yeah, for
Indiana,
sure.
very specifically, we need to break the culture, right? We need to address the whiteness in the room. We need to address the systemic racism in the room. We need to quit playing, for me, let's stop playing with the word bias, because bias don't mean shit to me, right? Racism, racial racist means something to me, right? You want me to use the word bias so that you feel comfortable having a conversation about not liking cheeseburgers because you would prefer, you know, a chicken sandwich, right? When the reality, what we're talking about is you would prefer to have more white people in the room and less black people. We would like to have all the resources and share none of the resources, because when we're talking about racism and systemic racism, that's what we're talking about. Like, you know, and I think, so tomorrow, y'all get to see Teah and I engage and how we do it on one-on-one. And I think it's gonna be enlightening because we're completely stark different in that sense, right? I'm the warrior, she's the politician in that relationship. And I'm like, give me the machete. And she's like, well, let's rewrite the laws. And I'm like, well, let's kill the guy who wrote the law the first time, and then we ain't gotta rewrite it, we just writing, right? We restructuring this thing the way we want it. So I would love the idea, I don't know who's doing it in this community, where we sit down and create a program that talks about whiteness, right? And the privilege, the white privilege that exists specifically in our spaces, right? New Albany, Clark County, Jeff, wherever that is, and how do we really create equity, right? You know, again, when we started the segment and I started the program, I said, you know, I sit on this committee and I asked all the people in that room, you know, what does equity look like in this community? You know, you say you want inclusion, you say you want diversity, you say you want, you know, the same opportunities for people who look the opposite of you. So what does it look like? And they can't name it. I love that, Missy. And how we can bring that, you know, we have to disrupt it, but beyond disrupting it, how do we put new systems in place? And this is maybe a rhetorical for here, and it's a real question there, right? Because as Shug said, the system's not broke. It's defined and designed to do exactly what it does. Amen. Right? We want to make a slave, we give somebody a felony. Right? We want to limit resources, we give someone a felony. We want to target a certain audience who uses a product other than other audience, specifically marijuana. We call it a class 1 or class A drug and say it's as harsh as cocaine or whatever else, right? But we'll allow liquor to be legal. So,
and then we remove people from the voting base.
And there it is, we remove people from the voting base. So, you know, this may be another conversation. I know we got to wrap up. This has been fun. I want to, you know, let's get back together. I would love to do more. I want to do more of this conversation because I think as we think about moving forward, it's super important that we do just the things you said, disrupt it. Right? We've got to get people to feel uncomfortable and we got to get them in a position. And here's the thing, just as many people who want change, there are people who don't want change. Amen. And we have to be aware of that because while we're fighting to move forward, there are going to be people fighting to keep the shackle on.
I would actually say more people don't want change.
Oh, wow, okay.
People don't like change. I mean, people fundamentally do not like change. So even though you can say you want change, do you really want it? I mean, really? Most people don't like change. They just dislike it. So
okay,
I would push back on you on that and say, yeah, I'm willing to bet more people don't want the change. It's why you have Juneteenth. We were talking about it outside. We have a new federal holiday.
Yes, thank God.
You know, and we're talking about Juneteenth, but Missy was talking about how we won't be able to teach students necessarily about what it means.
When you remove critical race theory from the classroom and when you make it illegal to even have that conversation. So why are we off on June 19th?
That's a thing.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, and but now the federal government, it is a good thing, but they've put a Band-Aid on and said, we took care of it for you. Like, we gave you a holiday.
So we should say, we got to wrap, but we should say, okay, federal government, we appreciate you. Mike Moore, what are you going to do? Gahan, what are you going to do? You know, 1SI, GLI, what are you going to do? Like, let's bump the feds, right? What are we going to do right here in our backyards? I like that. So are we going to change our education system so that we don't have history teachers in there who gloat and love, you know, the transatlantic slave trade because they love all the captains and that's what they teach in their class, right? But they don't teach the challenges that we now face in this world because of it, right? So yeah, I love that. Let's continue this conversation. Let's keep pushing it because I think it's going to be, we need more of it. And then we have to definitely put a strategy together so that we can change it. You know, when I was growing up, when we were in New York, you know, the guy on the radio used to say all the time, and I know he probably took it from somebody, you know, but change is going to happen regardless. You can either dictate it or it's going to happen, you know, or you can make it, right? So here's the thing. I say we dictate change, and those who don't want it, well, we go to commercial.
On June 17th and 18th, we are inviting you to face a common conversation about race, inclusion, diversity, equity, and the impact systemic racism has had on white and BIPOC communities. Our esteemed group of panelists include Indiana's own Dana Black, Charlestown Mayor Treva Hodges, State Representative Cherish Pryor, and Louisville's own Tim Finley Jr., and a host of other influential community leaders. Join us as we embark upon brave and necessary conversations about the move forward.
Start it up.
Man, y'all already see it. It's a powerhouse, right?
Oh, man.
So we've been here all day, hanging out, talking the good talk, having the hard conversation, doing the daring thing. And these two dudes decided to walk in off the street. No, not really.
Off the street.
Well, we got Pastor Tim and Pastor Chad with us. And we're just going to continue the conversation. Today we are talking about R.I.D.E. So if you're just stepping in there, that's race, equity, diversity, inclusion, you know, and how we move forward in our community. I think this one should be a fun conversation because we're all kind of activists in our own right and in our different spaces and how we deal with this thing. And, you know, Chad invited Teah and I to come talk at their church, it was a couple years ago.
A couple years ago.
And your church is predominantly Caucasian. And I thought, I remember Teah saying, we're gonna go talk at Chad's church. And I was like, huh? Why come? What for? Who's doing? Okay. They want to talk about racism. All right, let's get it. And then Pastor Tim, you've been out here for a minute, but then we have Breonna Taylor, and we really see you go hard in the paint. To the point where I remember watching the news that one day, and I know it's probably everybody keep bringing it up. You know, the cops had the gun to your head, and I was like, what in the heck? And but here we are, right? Because we have to start talking about, we've been talking about, let me rephrase that. We have to start talking the strategy of how we overcome this thing called racism and how it affects all our communities. And I know, you know, depending on the space that we're in, you know, there's a dynamic that says, well, it doesn't affect white people, it only affects black people, right? And the reality of it is it does affect us all. It just affects us all differently.
Right.
And for black folk, it's been affecting us far longer in all aspects of this of the country. But specifically, I want to talk about the things that we face here. And because in Louisville, I remember, and I'm gonna say this, in Southern Indiana, they're gonna say, well, we don't have that problem, but we do. But in Louisville, I remember, a couple years ago when the white dude shot the black man coming out of Kroger's. And, the story behind that, and we all screamed that it was a race, it was a hate crime. And the story behind that, I remember, was when the dude ran up to another white dude and said, well, white people don't kill white people. And then we've had this ongoing issue in Louisville ever since. What Missy would say is whiteness, right? So I want to just start with this premise and say, what are your thoughts? How do we move forward? Just experience, history, wisdom, what?
Well, I think I would use James Baldwin's quote that I use frequently, that you cannot fix what you will not face. And I was listening to the last conversation, and I think I have grown to a different place now. Several years ago, I was using terms like disrupt. I loosely used the term abolitionist. And I adopted those words because they're trendy. They're in our modern vernacular as it relates to social justice. Here recently, even making the transition into policy and politics and all that good stuff, I've started to see that the inherent whiteness of America is not going to improve. Similar to the racial wealth gap. I just posted this today, that we're on track by 2053, I think it's 2053, for black and brown families to have zero wealth. It's on track.
Our current track record.
That the wealth gap is widening exponentially. And we're still trying to convince, again, whiteness and the structural systemic issues of this country that there is actually an issue. We're trying to convince them that this structure is present, while the structure that's present is currently continuing to abuse black and brown people. And that's not an opinion. We saw it with COVID-19 and the whole 2.5 times the rate in black people dying than white people. We see it with the racial wealth gap, which is highly documented. We see it with education statistics. We see it with housing. We see it with banking, lending. Every single statistical category, there are these major issues. So I'm at a place now to where I understand, and I know that, again, these terms, we've got to get to the table. We've got to get a seat at the table. Here's my thought. The table has to be burned and thrown away.
Let's get it.
The issue is that we're trying to improve upon something that is never going to be improved. That if America is going to become this place where it lives up to these wonderful ideals on paper, America must cease to exist. Because going back to the Constitution, going back to all these wonderful things, the deifying of the forefathers, all these things, the genesis, and as preachers, we know the law first mentioned. The beginning of America was steeped in racism, was steeped in structural inequity. And if we're going to see a change, we have to not disrupt, because when you disrupt something, you disrupt it for a time, but eventually it'll come back.
Yeah.
If you're going to change America, it has to be dismantled. And I know people hear that and they think, oh, he's talking about chaos, rioting, anarchy. Absolutely not. But we have to fundamentally change across the board everything. That's why when I say things like defund the police, abolish those current way of policing, people get very nervous. No, don't say that. But we have to look at policing, the culture of it. It started as a slave patrol.
Yes.
And hundreds of years later, we're still dealing with the issues in policing. I don't believe in police reform, because you cannot reform that level of toxic culture. It has to be rethought, reimagined, defunded, and rebuilt we have to rethink public safety. So again, so much of what we're dealing with now, and I mean, again, I don't want to take up all the time, we're seeing that America romanticizes all of these wonderful things about the improvement and unity and holding hands, and we can't see color, and it's foolishness. It is absolutely, positively foolish that if there's going to be real change, we've got to do this, but we've got to mobilize, and people with power, which is going to be, and I always tell people, I'm not against white people, but I am absolutely against whiteness, because whiteness is the issue. White people are not the issue. I can't be Christian and see Jesus one day and have an ought or hatred against my brother, no matter what color he is. But whiteness is the problem. Whiteness is the issue. I haven't even talked about the industrial prison complex.
So hold that thought before you jump in there. Okay. Chad, let's go, because I know people.
No, I'm going to go home because Tim already said everything that I probably would say. Yeah, except for I would say push a little harder on the whole thing on chaos and anarchy a little bit. I mean, I've done some studies recently on anarchy theology, and we don't want to advocate violence by any means. Very, very little is ever accomplished with violence. But I believe the systems are too corrupt that you do have to tear them down to rebuild them. I think we're beyond reform in a lot of areas. And so that to me, I agree with what he's saying on that. I think you can look through so many systems and see where we cannot advance because the people in power, such as myself, I'm a straight white man, I hold power. And so we aren't willing to give that up. We aren't willing to give it up. And so to ask me to reform and to give up something, really, you think wide, like a wide net of that. You want to do that financially. You're asking people in power to give up all their financial wealth and their power at the boardroom. They're not going to do it. And the reason why you're going to see that disparity keep increasing is wealth grows far more than income. And so, I've been on this thing recently about, you got to tax income. You got to tax income and put that back into services to help create more equity in our country. You talk about equity. I was thinking of something you said earlier, and I wanted to bring this up because you were talking about when you apply for a bank loan. Yeah. And you want to do away with the fact that you don't want to write black-owned business anymore, and because that becomes equality. See, that's equity. I think that's equality, and I think the steps of this goes equity first. Equity says if we're in the church, and I wanted to build a diverse church, and there's 10 of us on the board, 9 of us are white, 1's black, and we try to vote for how our service will look and the music we will sing. 9 of us are going to drown out that one voice because we still hold the vote. The power I have to give the power to the one. Like, I have to listen to them. If they say, no, this is the music we sing, this is what we do, this is how we need to lead, we actually have to listen to the minority voice and do it and put it in place. So I have to give up my power, the thing that keeps me comfortable, because we never grow in comfort, we only grow in the uncomfortable. And so we have to get uncomfortable, right? You go to the gym, and you're gonna get big, picking up 5-pound weights, lifting for 10 seconds. You have to pick the times that it sucks, you gotta sweat it out, you're gonna have some pain. You got to get uncomfortable to grow, and so for me, it's the equity has to come first, and then we have to dismantle the systems of injustice. Okay. Once we take away the systems of injustice that are around and rebuild those, and now we can get to equality. Right. Because equality can't come until those systems are removed. That's when you can apply for the bank loan. I think this is just me. Educate me something if I'm wrong, but that's when you can apply for the bank loan and say, I'm just a business owner. Cool. Yeah. Let's give it to you. But right now, because minority groups, because people who are black, because women have not had the same power, shared power as a white man, we have to be willing to share that wealth and share that power to help, and then use those people to say, tell us how me being straight white man, how do I help rebuild that the ways that you tell me to rebuild, not the way I think it should be rebuilt. And that's the point that he makes is extremely important. And I'm 100% with you that equity has to be one, because I think what we've done is we've misunderstood what equity will do. We've looked at it like, this is whiteness, this is white, this is black. We've got to do something, we've got to give them something, give these people something, and move together. But it just does this. It never changes the gap. Equity says, I'm gonna give those here what they deserve and enough to get to equality, and then we go. America's not ready to do that. And that's why
when you hear reparations, even black people, because it's been inherently taught to us that reparations is so hard to do. How do you do it? It's not up to us to figure it out. But reparations are absolutely important. And I'll say this and be quiet. We found out that America knows how to put checks out into the mail to every American.
Absolutely. COVID.
We found out real fast that they can get 3 and 4 checks in a short amount of time to a mass group of people and to make it all right. But for years it's been, and I've been in circles with black folks. No, Pastor Tim, I mean, what do you think? They're going to send a check to every black person? And then 2020 happened.
There it is. America may not do it. I think America has shown, again, future has a past. America will destroy itself first, which is kind of what we want. But they'll destroy itself first. They'll try to take everything away from everybody before they do something like that. But I am curious, do you think that we could do it locally? And I mean, you know, we're sitting in Indiana. We're right across the river from Kentucky. You know, are there things that we can do locally? And it might be no.
If you put the right people in positions of power with the right community mindset, with the kind of resolve and mentality that's dealing with what we're talking about right now, it absolutely can be done.
Okay.
I'm not going to give a shameless plug, but I'm just saying.
I mean, we sit next to him. Let's shameless plug.
I mean, because again, there are things that can be done tomorrow. The same way that I believe that we could end houselessness immediately. I believe if we committed ourselves to it as a city, as a country, at the end of the day, we throw away food that we don't sell, restaurants.
Yes.
And you have people in this country who are dying of starvation. If we wanted to end hunger, we could do it. If we wanted to end houselessness, we could do it. And if we wanted to deal with the economic wealth gap in this country that one group of people are suffering under because of America's original sin, it could be done. But the problem is, in order for a capitalistic society to stay functional, you have to have the haves and you have to have the have-nots. And for 401 plus years, black people have been the have-nots.
Okay. Chad?
Yeah, so I think when we think reparations, I think, you know, from my context, where you know, white community, and we view that as such a negative thing. But when you really, because you have to look back at history, and sometimes we don't want to confront our history, our country's original sin. And so yes, I think locally we can. What we have to do is look at our history. How did we go about acquiring all that we have? All the wealth that we have, the land that we have, the businesses that we had. Who do we take advantage of in the past, and how do we pay that back? In what way? So I'll give 2 examples. One, right, people love to talk about, we love our military. We do. We love our military, love our country, love all that. World War II. Black veterans did not get the use of the GI Bill, right? Correct. They did not get use of the GI Bill. So they didn't get the housing that white veterans got. They didn't get the education that white veterans got. And if they did get pushed into education, it was usually trades, less income. And so we've done nothing about that historically for those individuals. And it cost about, I think it was like $1.2 billion of wealth. We should literally write a check right now to anybody who is part of those families, any survivor, and say, here you go. Does that solve the problem? No, but that's $1.2 billion just for that group. So think about the lack of, not commitment, but lack of being a part of building the wealth of this country. They haven't been, the black people have not been a part of building the wealth of this country. They're not shared in that. That's equity. Second thing is, I heard a story about a church in Oklahoma. They had required their church through taking land from American Indians from that area. I forget what tribe it was. So somebody said, well, you could pay reparations to the natives for that land. And they said, what would that look like? They said, what you do is you sell your church to the Native Americans, and then you pay them rent for that. Oh, no, we can't do that. We can't. No way can we do that. But that is making a reparation for what you want to do. So there are ways. Which is biblical. Right. There are ways to do this. But even when we're told how to do it, We don't want to do it because we have to give up our comfort. And I get it's hard. It is hard, but that's what we have to do. So I guarantee you, if we looked at our history, that's why it's important to look at our history. You want to learn our history? Yeah, sure. Go learn our history. You may not like what you read, but that can tell us how do we kind of tear down some of these systems and make right of what has happened, what have been the wrongs that we've had in our
Which is why
communities.
people are losing their mind over critical race theory.
Yeah.
Because critical race theory is...
If you believe in original sin, Adam and Eve, should you not believe in critical race theory?
I read in a recent story that they had filed a bill for teachers to wear body cams to make sure that they're not teaching race theory. Now think about the irony in that you fight to get body cams on police officers, and you have a fight to get it. But now legislators are introducing bills to put body cams on teachers to make sure that they're not teaching critical race theory. And then something you said, and again, I think you make fantastic points. You said Oklahoma, and again, we just celebrated the 100 years since the Tulsa Race Massacre and Black Wall Street. Well, if you go there today, the majority of those square blocks are white-owned.
Yeah, the other part's a highway.
Absolutely, which is another part of redlining, because a part of redlining is you always see highways right in the middle of black neighborhoods.
Yes.
Yeah, and critical race theory, if you're a Christian and you believe, not everybody, will follow the idea of Adam and Eve and original sin from that, but there's obviously a big group that does. So if you believe that we are today paying for the sins of Adam and Eve, why would that not apply to critical race theory, that somehow the system of the past is still affecting us today? It's a parallel.
Well, it's because we romanticize America. Again, I use Colin Kaepernick. That Colin Kaepernick never came out against the military, never came out against all of these different things that were thrown into the argument to deflect. He simply talked about police brutality. And the people in power, not the employees, the players, but the owners, the people in power were able to blackball him, and we saw our country again continue to split into two places. You were talking about the way that you grew up. I grew up in a home that was constantly, I'll put it like this, I was never taught to stand for the anthem. We did it when you're in school, but that was never something that my parents taught me. You pledge allegiance to God.
Okay.
You don't pledge allegiance to cloth. I've always been, raised in a place, in a home, nurtured to see race, to realize that you're going into a hostile world and you have to do what is necessary to come out on top. Everything that's ethical and spiritually prudent. But again, those are the kinds of things that so many people have not had that experience. So you had people 5 years ago who just found out about Tulsa. You have people who had no idea, that have no idea about the contributions of black people in the United States. And you have people now actively seeking to block the real history, because he who controls history and the way it's told can control the future. And one of the things that's causing such trepidation with these legislators is that somebody's going to mess around and educate America that it is not the home of the free and the land of the brave like it's sung about.
Not at all, not even close. So it's interesting. So I'll say this because we're sitting on a landfill. This is predominantly the black community. Now, much of the black community started downtown, right? The original black school was downtown, right? I didn't know what a division street meant until I moved here, which they was like, yeah, that's a division street. And I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I've never heard of
white
that.
people live on one side, the black people live on the other.
So it's the West Ninth Divide. That's what it is.
The Ninth Street Divide.
Okay, gotcha.
And then so there's that in New Albany, and then there's the train track. And so I learned so much when we moved here. But one of the things I started realizing is I traveled like much of Southern Indiana, and I started looking, I was like, man, the wealthier homes are built on great lands, right? And then somebody told me that, downtown, much of downtown Jeff used to be black. And then I said, well, that's interesting that you moved all the black people to a landfill, and that's where they could buy homes. And then you set up and build these historic homes downtown, and very few black people live down there. And I'm like, that's an interesting dynamic. So then I started studying, and we started looking at Clarksville. And Clarksville was developed specifically on the Red Line. in the sense that they created ordinances that said black people couldn't even live in certain segments of Clarksville as a whole.
Yeah.
And I understand a lot of that still exists in that space. So as we talk about this wealth and this equity position, and we're definitely local, because I mean, I know in most of my conversations, there's this debate between Louisville and New Albany and Jeff, and I laugh and I'm like, y'all don't realize that they're all the same? And for the most part, it's the same families who are controlling and dictating much of what happens and how we do or don't grow. So I like the idea in a sense, probably, you know, we may have to tear it all down in order to rebuild it and to rebuild it the way we want it to look. So I'm gonna ask a question, what does it look like?
Like critical race theory, perfect example. Critical race theory would tear down the American ideal, this historic context that America is this and America is this, and that if you just work hard, you'll get to here. If we were to start educating children, adults, if this was a part of their core curriculum, that this is what America is, right then, you start to tear down the American ideal.
Okay.
That's one part. When you talk about getting people into positions of power, and again, I'm sort of on the fence with certain things that go with that, but when you talk about getting people in positions of power, you have to have like-minded people. Imagine this, imagine me and my brother here, we are extremely powerful legislators, that we can draft up legislation that has generational change. That is, again, another way you're tearing things down. There's a reason why one party has done everything that they can. And I shouldn't just say one party, because before that party was the other party. But voting rights. The fact that in Georgia now, it's illegal to pass out waters to people who are standing in line to vote, because it wants to encourage people to leave the line. The reason why there's only a certain amount of voting poll locations in the west end of Louisville, it's because they know if the people who are being oppressed mobilize, come out, and begin to put people in positions of power, all of a sudden now, you can see things begin to completely be upended. Again, it's not a fix overnight, but these are the kinds of things that when we say tear it down, it's not literally going out and putting a torch to a building. You know, I'm one, and I learned this from Tamika Mallory, I never say that I'm a peaceful protester, because I'm not a peaceful protester. I'm a nonviolent protester, but this is not peace. No. I'm not coming to bring peace. I'm coming to bring a sword. But the point is, we've got to.
said that, right? Am I right?
Jesus said that.
Let's get it.
Yeah, but I think that is tearing it down. Okay. It is attacking these racist structures. Many white people, when they talk about racism, they see racism through the lens of prejudice.
Okay, let's define
individual
that.
things. When you talk to black people, and especially people of color, about racism, we think in terms of systems, the industries. And it allows, when you talk about just prejudice, then you say, I'm not racist.
Right.
We look at it and say, it ain't about you individually. That's a whole nother conversation. But we're saying the education system is racist. The healthcare system is racist. The jails are racist. The criminal justice is racist. The politicians are racist. All of it's racist. And all of a sudden now it causes us all to have to look at, again, going back to the fabric of the country, that all of this mess has been engineered, as you said, and I've heard so many times, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. That is what has to change. And that's what racism, and it's just, we've got to expand our view, and I'll stop. You know.
No, before, that's cool. Before, let's go to a break real quick, Rakai, and then let's come back and chat, let's jump in here.
Okay.
All right.
Yo, this your boy Miguel, and welcome to Common Conversations. Yeah, that's it. 2020 is behind us. It was crazy. It was all kind of new. And yo, we know how to pivot. This is 2021. Let's get it in. And I want to have you on the show. Come podcast with me. Let's go live. Let's sit down and talk about all the good, the bad, the ugly, the green, the funny. Yo, y'all know how we do it. This is Miguel. This is Common Conversations, and I'm inviting you to come tell your story. Let's go.
Indiana's own Dana Black here, and if you're anything like me, you get tired of waiting on the Indiana media to cover the issues that matter to Hoosier liberals, progressives, and Democrats. Our issues and candidates seem to always get ignored. Now, you don't have to wait to hear from left-leaning blue politicians regarding the issues that matter to us. Turn Left is your information source. Join us each Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live. Turn Left, Indiana politics from the left side of things.
Start it up.
2, 1. We're back. Yo, this is a dope conversation. Like, I knew this was going to be the great way to wrap up, and I hope y'all are enjoying it. This is Miguel. This is Common Convo. If you're watching the stream today, thank you. If you're going to be checking out the podcast later, because we're going to chop this up. Y'all know how we get down. But these are questions that you definitely need to be having at home, in the workspace. You know, this is a brave conversation. A lot of people are afraid of it. You know, I commend and love everybody who is showing up today to do this on camera and in a live space, right? Because ain't nobody here Ice Cube, ain't nobody here no multimillionaires. And the reality of it is we're talking about how we change, not at a global scale, but right here at home, right? Because it starts right here at home. It starts where we live. And if we can be the greatest experiment ever and bring equity and equality to our own home for our children, then it's a win. And I think it's gonna be cool because this conversation will lead to what we're gonna start tomorrow, because we actually have the youth NAACP here who are going to engage in their own conversation about where they are and how they see things. And I think that's super important. But as we were talking before we left, we're, you know, critical race theory, we're talking about, you know, what that really looks like to change and to move forward right here in our own spaces. So, Chad, if you can jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about like what does that look like in a world that we've started to maybe fix, rebuild, or make better. So, you were talking about parks, right? Go to New York City. I challenge anybody. Go to any city you want. Go to any city you want. Go down to predominantly black neighborhoods and get out of your car and walk from there into the nice area. Like we did this in New York. We were in more predominantly poor area and walked to Manhattan, and you see gray, trash, whatever is on there, and then as you get to Manhattan, green, trees, and all that. That's racism, right? That's racism in how we develop our cities. I mean, you go down here, downtown, like where's really good public transportation to a good supermarket? How about to a gym? Right, so you talk about COVID affecting people and predominantly having a greater effect to people in the black community. Why? Because they don't always have access to the gyms, to the doctor offices, to the good food. They live in more poverty than a white individual does. So this affects how a disease treats them. So to start to look at our communities, we have to look at our own communities and start to say, how is this structured? When we bring businesses in, are we bringing businesses in just to the white suburban part of town, or are we finding ways to bring businesses in into the poor areas of town, to areas of diversity, to the black community, so they have the same access that somebody like myself has? So that's one. And I also think it just comes down to also the view, how we view people, right? So I think youth sports is I love talking about youth sports because I think it's the travel sports is one of the biggest crimes of the world. People getting rich on kids, no doubt about it. But if you look at Jeff GRC, and I did this a couple years ago, looked at the amount of kids who played baseball on the travel teams. Very few kids were black. Vast majority are white. And think how much money it costs for a kid, thousands of dollars to travel. So I asked a friend of mine, I'm like, but what do you do if a kid can't really afford it? I mean, the little leagues and these, they used to help give kids confidence and exercise and build community around an activity. It's not there because you have to have money to go play. And he said, well, if they have talent, we can fundraise for them, or they can fundraise themselves. Where does the black kid go to fundraise? If the black kid lives in the poor neighborhood, if the black kid comes to my neighborhood, which is predominantly white, and knocks on doors, do you think a white family is going to just turn over money, or do you think that they will believe that he's using the money for something he shouldn't use it for? So how we view people and the opportunities that we give them, we have to build more equity, starting with our young people, to give them the same opportunities and chances that everybody else has. And I see that still being becoming a bigger problem because I do youth ministry. So I see this as a bigger problem. I have a kid in my youth who says every year when I start new teachers, I know because I'm black that they instantly think I'm going to be a problem in the class. And so she has to work extra hard at not being a problem in the class because of how she thinks the teachers are going to view her. Now, whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. That's her perception, and that's reality.
Yeah.
My kid who's white doesn't get treated that way, doesn't ever feel that way. And so there's some ways in which we view people, and obviously interactions have been negative. Obviously there's been things that have happened. So those are the little differences that we can do inside our classrooms, our churches, our communities, to ensure that, that we are moving forward on some of this and building a more equity community, giving the proper opportunities to help tear that down. Because I view, like, even the youth sports, that's an injustice. When we keep kids and people of color away from participating in sports simply because they can't afford it, that's wrong. That's an injustice.
Well, it's a couple things that I think you bring up that are great. And it makes me think, even with, you talk about white privilege. And I was recently doing a show and they asked me, and I think they were somewhat condescending, but what is white privilege? Tell me what white privilege is. And I didn't want to give the run-of-the-mill sort of general answer. Thought about it for a second, and this is what I think white privilege is. And the young lady is what made me think about this in the class. For white people, you're always given the benefit of the doubt. If you go into, for instance, we're both pastors.
Amen to this, man.
We're both pastors. He walks in and says, I'm Pastor, what's your first name?
Chad.
Pastor Chad. They don't look at his tattoos, none of those things. He's Pastor Chad. I'll walk in dressed the same way, same tattoos, and it is, you're a thug.
We literally almost have the same. You have flowers. I got
Listen,
we literally almost have the same tattoos.
Accepted from Pastor Chad, I'm looked at as, whoa, you look real rapper thuggish. So there's the benefit of the doubt, but black people, we live with the burden of proof. We have to constantly prove that we weren't there to steal. We have to constantly prove to the security guard at Walgreens that I'm just looking for something. We have to constantly prove to the police officer that I'm taking this short way home and I'm coming through a nice neighborhood, or I live here too. We have to prove these things. So it's the burden of proof and the benefit of the doubt. And to me, when that is acknowledged, that, and it's more than that, that's a huge, huge reality. The second thing I would say, and it goes back to when you talked about how do we fix certain things. And Pastor Chad said something that I like, but I would go a step further. When you say bringing certain services and businesses into black communities, I'm with that to a degree. But I think in order for us to build wealth, there needs to be investment into black people who do the same thing and allow them to build in their community. it's not simply bringing Walmart.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
And what you said is right. But it's for me, it's investing and divesting. It's time for us. It's time for community. It's time for government. It's time for resource-rich corporations like Churchill Downs to invest into black ownership, black entrepreneurship. And those are the kind of things that, again, change the landscape. Absolutely, positively change the landscape. And then the last thing I'll say about youth sports, I want to get to a point to where we change the perspective of young black kids. Right now, you know this, I know this, Rakai knows this, that in our neighborhoods or in the way that we were kind of brought up was the way out of the hood is either you rap or you play ball.
Absolutely.
So everybody was either cutting mixtapes or you were in the gym because you want to get a scholarship. And now, again, the numbers are astronomically low that that's actually going to happen. But we've got to change to where we're bringing coding to our neighborhood.
Absolutely.
We're bringing chess to our neighborhood. We're bringing wealth building, asset framing, teaching to our neighborhood from an early age to where they're saying, if you want to play ball, play ball. If you want to rap, rap. But there's like 30 other things that can help you to get to this level of success. If you want to get that chain, you can get that chain not just with an MBA check, you can get it with your own coding business check. And that's where you change the perspective. But as long as we're buying into this idea that all we're good for is entertainment and athleticism, that's a part of racism.
Absolutely.
You know, I played ball, but everywhere I go, I'll never forget this. And this is a true story. The trustees of Kingdom Fellowship will tell you this. I live in an area with a nice size house for me, just me and my two dogs. And I was there for years. My neighbors said not a mumbling word to me. I'd come home like this, park in the garage, two-car garage, I have two big cane Corsos, and I'd walk them, beautiful dogs. And I'm out there with a suit on, two cane Corsos on my cell phone.
That's a rap album.
Now, so I'm walking around, and I mean, people are jumping in their cars, going inside. So one day, the guy that cuts my grass, white guy, was recommended to me by Deacon Kurt Conrad. White guy at the church. He said, he was like, hey man, how are your neighbors treating you? And I said, man, you know, and I've been there about 6-7 years at that point. They don't really talk to me that much, but I'm used to that. And I was like, yeah, they're not really talking. He said, well, I think I know why. And I said, why? He said, I cut, the grass of all your neighbors around you. They all think you're a drug dealer. They said that you dress nice.
Wow.
You dress nice. You're not there that much. You have a nice truck. You have these two big dogs, and you got these suits. Now, it wasn't the first thing educated, successful black entrepreneur. It wasn't pastor of a church and community leader and doing well for himself. The first thing they thought with the appearance of success and prosperity was, you got to be selling drugs.
How about that? Wow. So black people can't achieve in this country. And
the
our
perspective has to change across the board.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I want to add to something, like you said, like when you said take it a step further, like I think that's important for people who are white to like hear that, because how many times do we sit in a room, I make that comment, I think I'm doing something good. You talk about being an ally, like you want to be an ally, but am I really doing enough? And like part of that is, I go, well, let's bring a business in, but when somebody says, that's great, Chad, but let's talk equity. You have to fight to bring in the black owned business. Like, yes, okay, nope, you're right with that. Like, and to actually do something about that and like go, okay, we're only going to consider, because we've talked about this before in church, and I made this comment before of saying, if we want to become a diverse church, and there's reasons why we have predominantly black churches, and they're for the ways of worship, and that goes back to slavery, and that's okay. But if you want to get diverse, you have to have representative leadership. And what do I know about black worship? Nothing. I know nothing. Neither does my white senior minister. So if we wanted to actually become more diverse, we would have to purposefully hire somebody of color, Hispanic or black.
Yeah.
Well, that bothers white people. I mean, I've had so much pushback on that.
Seriously?
Yes, but it's like, because they view that as reverse racism. And, you know, it's like, yeah, but we've held the power structure, and I don't know anything about that, so I have to. We're not saying hire unqualified people. We're saying there's good qualified people. I need to go find that person that represents. We have that leadership. You know how empowering that is for the kid growing up in the community. Going, I don't have to rely on basketball or football or baseball. I can go be the teacher. I can go be the president. I can go own the business. I can go be the preacher. You know, because now they see that being represented in other ways and being lifted up. So, like, we have to, I think people in power like myself, white straight man, like, we have to fight harder for that, to build that equity, because that is how we start to change that perception. And we have to be called on that, because you could easily let that slide by, and I'm glad that you said something, because, like, oh yeah, okay, I got to keep, you got to keep pushing on me sometimes. Okay, no, I have to go a step further. Like, that's fair, and that's what we need.
To your point, I think what I have sort of discovered in the last couple years, there are allies, and then there are accomplices. You're talking about being an accomplice. We have a lot of allies, and allies can see what you're talking about and even agree with what you're saying. But when they leave your presence or leave that particular black person circle, they go back to comfort and privilege and never fight for anything. What you're talking about, and that's why this conversation is so dope, it's being an accomplice. It means when you're not around me, you're still like, yo, this is not cool. We're not going to do this. So that's such an important distinction. The second thing, I remember reading something in CNN where it was talking about the very thing you're talking about in terms of white churches, black churches, and I thought it was so interesting statistically that that white people and black people were more given to sit under white leadership than white church folk sitting under black leadership. And when white Christians sat under black leadership, if they had kids, generally they found out that they left the black space when their kids got to dating age.
Wow.
How about that?
I think we should rap on that one right there. That's ether.
That's good.
We got a lot of work to do.
But this is how it starts, man. This is good stuff.
I appreciate y'all coming, and it means a lot. And I understand what it means to brave this. Y'all know what it means to brave this. And, you know, I can't constantly articulate the way I want to, what it means to brave these conversations and to live in our community and to fight for equity for our people. Because there is a significant cost, and, you know, whether you know, the system wants to come after you and use its police to do so, or if they want to cripple your economic positions, right? And so we know the first and the fastest way to hush up black folks and white folks used to be to lynch them, right? And then prior to that would be to shut down their economic means, right? Their means of earning income and things like that. And we still see a lot of that today. So there is a cost to having this conversation. There's a cost. I'm gonna change friend and go with accomplice. I like that. You know, there is a cost to being an accomplice, you know, and I think about, and again, I said it in the last discussion, I think about the kids when we were young, the guys who ran with me, right? Because I grew up in predominantly white communities and I fought. I was, you know, there was a point where I was no longer having a discussion. You know, if you said the wrong word, I was hitting you, I was knocking you out. I don't care if it was 100 of you, it was gonna happen. And then you realize you would grow up one day and say, okay, you can't fight everybody. So there's gotta be another way, you know. But I'm 45 and I'm thinking, yeah, brother. And I'm thinking, I can't thank you. You know, I look at my girl over there and I think, I can't keep fighting this. This is a dog fight that, you know, how do we change it? And we have these conversations all the time and people will say, well, you can't start a war because America will win. I'm like, well, America been at war, we haven't. You know, and I don't know what it's gonna mean to flip this. And so when opportunity came and community folks said, you know, I think someone was talking out the side of their mouth. I don't think they thought I was actually gonna do it either. But they was like, you know, we'll help fund it. We'll help you make it happen if you do it. I'm like, you must not know who you're talking to. Let's put this together and let's see who I can get to come out, because the next steps are action steps. And you're right, we have to get the right people in power. You won't say it, I'm gonna say it. FIndley is running for mayor in Louisville, and he's the right man for the job, right? Because we have to change the structure and the dynamics in which we're doing the thing. Because we know it doesn't work in a sense of for all of us, right? And so you're right, those dynamics have to change. We have to change both public and private policy. We have to change institutions. And it's, we have to, I'll say this, and I guess it's a great thing because I'm sitting with two people who kind of agree. We have to strip it down to zero and build it back up. And that's the best way that we can do it. And I'd love for us to stop looking at the United States as a whole and say, okay, how do we do it at home? Right where we're sitting, right where the greatest impact is going to be. So when WHAS asks any of us that next question of what does a society that doesn't have racism look like, we can say, come to Jeffersonville, come to Louisville, and we'll show you. We're not going to look somewhere else to see who's doing it right, because everybody's got it wrong. And it's going to take people like y'all. It's going to take folks that's been on this panel and these conversations all day long, who's doing the work. And that's a brave and beautiful thing. So I appreciate it. As we walk out of here, y'all have any last words? I want to
just thank you for having me. This has been great, and nice to meet you too. I really enjoyed you.
Good luck in the mayor race, man. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me out, man.
Absolutely. See what happens when you introduce strangers? Great things happen. Real talk. Ricardo's an exit on that piece. If you'll get ready to cue it. Folks, we're going to be here tomorrow. We've got another great discussion. We're bringing down State Representative Cherish Pryor. Nicole Bolden will be back as she's hosting that particular conversation with Indiana's own Dana Black, and y'all know her. She is a mouth, and has got a lot of ideas in terms of how we change things structurally within our community. But even more importantly, we're going to hear from our youth, because this fight is about them, right? It's about our future. It's about their future, multi-generational, and that's what we have to start looking at. And so I think, James Bolden asked the question, what is your community, what does your children look at when they see your community? And we have to be asking that same question. Where are our 12-year-olds, our 15-year-olds, our 17-year-olds? How do they see the future, because it's their future? And are they a part of it? They have to be part of the action steps, and they also have to be part of the conversation. So this is your boy, Miguel. This is Common Conversations. I appreciate everybody. Want to thank all our partners and our sponsors. And we'll hear from Trent FIndley tomorrow, too, with Metro United Way. So it's going to be a powerhouse. Y'all tune in from 3 to 7. And if you notice, we won't have you the whole time. There it is. This is your boy, and we out.